The girl was amazed to see the boy. He turned out to be surprisingly cute. She felt embarrassed. She wanted so much to touch his hair. And those chubby cheeks just drove her crazy. But she understood that she could not allow herself such liberties. So, I just said hello to Elliot. However, the boy looked scared when he saw her. She wondered, had she really treated him so badly all this time that he reacted like this? The girl invited Elliot to go for a walk with his mother. But the boy just looked at her with bewilderment, and she didn't know how to react correctly. Suddenly he started crying and asked if he had done something bad. The girl did not understand at all why he was behaving this way. The boy insisted that if he had done something wrong, she should just say so, and he would fix everything. The main character was confused. Elliot's behavior seemed strange to her. She didn't understand why he was crying. But then the boy added that if he was not guilty of anything, she shouldn't scare him like that. The girl rushed to him, trying to explain that everything was wrong. She was scared. She hadn't done anything bad to the boy, but why was he reacting like that? Suddenly, Elliot's father came up to them and asked his son what happened. He hugged the boy and told him to calm down, but he continued to cry. The girl was shocked and a little embarrassed. In front of her was a face that was difficult to get used to. Elliot's beauty is due to these excellent genes. The father calmly assured his son that everything was fine now. The girl was happy. At least the father was taking care of the child. But the man gave her an angry look, and she decided that she was irritating him again with something. She didn't understand what he was talking about, and the man said that perhaps she didn't like him, but he is still her son. But the girl didn't understand at all what he was talking about. She wanted to say that her love for him was immeasurable, but then he simply wouldn't believe it. The girl could not understand why among the many characters, she was the one who ended up in this body. She had become a terrible mother-in-law, and the thought terrified her. She wondered what others would do if they one day opened their eyes to a novel they had read before, and they would have found themselves in the body of the hated mother-in-law, and at the moment when the son and husband were already feeling disgust towards her. She didn't know what to do in this situation. Perhaps it was worth trying to improve relations with his son, at least now, or try to make peace with her husband, but she didn't have the courage to do so. She didn't understand why she had come here now, and not before the wedding, if fate had decided to change everything. She was already hated by everyone, and didn't know how to fix the situation. She sighed, and wondered why Anastasia lived the way she did. Anastasia von Valois is the horrible mother-in-law from the fantasy romance novel Lily in Your Arms. Anastasia, born into the aristocratic family of the Marquise of Saxe, was the embodiment of arrogance. She considered herself the most noble in the world, and did not take seriously those who stood below her in status. At least she only associated with high-ranking aristocrats whom she considered her equals. Her selfishness made many uncomfortable, including her husband, Alexei von Valois, Elliot's father. Over time, Anastasia gave birth to a son from Alexei. Alexei could not understand why she was so obsessed with sharing a bed with him. Of course, all because this was the only way she could establish herself as the mistress of Valois. In such circumstances, the son born in this marriage not only did not know maternal love, but was also surrounded by coldness and contempt. She constantly scolded him and said that he irritated her. Looking back at the original story, the girl understood why Elliot was afraid of her now. Ultimately, the grown-up Elliot becomes the protagonist, and Anastasia, having become a mother-in-law, treats Liliana like an eyesore and mocks her. Eventually, Anastasia commits so much evil that she is banished from Valois. But even after that, she continues to plot against Liliana and almost brings her to her death. She is eventually executed by her angry family. After this, Elliot and Liliana realize their feelings for each other, and everyone lives happily ever after. This is the ending of the novel, but now the girl understands that this means her own death. But if she doesn't start causing trouble, like in the original story, she will remain intact, but she may be bullied by her family. Elliot and Liliana were her favorite couple, and she doesn't want to be hated by those she cares about so much. But Elliot is already 7 years old, which means he has been accumulating hatred towards her all this time. She does not understand at all how to cope with this situation now. Suddenly she wondered, what about Liliana? As the novel progresses, Alexei and Elliot will begin to care for Liliana and fall in love with her. But if she lures Liliana to her side, they haven't even met yet in the story. About 10 years later, Liliana will turn to her father and say that she does not consider her mother a bad person. If things work out this way, she'll probably be fine. She will be able to buy karma points from the main character and thus improve the family's attitude towards her. She considered herself simply brilliant. All that was left was to wait a little while. The mother-in-law is already heading towards Liliana. Thus, Anastasia took the first decisive step towards her salvation from death. This orphanage turned out to be even bigger than she thought. Liliana was abused in this shelter. Although the Duke of Everett's family had great influence and a rich family history, Liliana was their only daughter. As a result of an accident, she lost her parents and was placed under the guardianship of a distant relative, Baron Rondini. He had a deep-rooted sense of inferiority towards Everett's family. The only real reason he had for caring for Liliana was the Everett family inheritance. However, his plans did not come to fruition. Alexei, a longtime friend of the Count, defended his property. And eventually the arrows of envy, jealousy, and discontent of the Count and Countess Rondini fell upon the young Liliana in the form of violence. When the little girl begged to be let go to Alexei, the Baron placed her in an orphanage. She did not understand how he could do this to her future daughter-in-law. Even knowing that Alexei was close to the Duke, and Liliana and Elliot were in a relationship leading to marriage, they were not afraid of anything continued to humiliate her and see in her only money. The Rondinis will probably be very surprised at what the lady protagonist is going to do. She knocked, and then the girl ran up to her, curiously asking who she was. At that moment she realized that she was familiar with this child because she had eyes the color of young spring shoots. The girl also had curly blonde hair. She asked in bewilderment what the lady had come for. It was definitely Liliana, and Anastasia couldn't help but admire her. This child looked like an angel without wings, but the girl did not understand why the lady was behaving so strangely. I needed to calm down. She looked exactly as described in the novel, but it was better to ask again, just in case. She asked if there was a girl named Liliana Everett in this shelter. The girl was surprised and then said that it was her, as she thought such a beautiful child could not be the main character of this novel. Until now, she was sure that her son was the cutest child in this world. But no, her daughter-in-law turned out to be even cuter. She had to remain sane, so she simply introduced herself to the girl and asked if the Baroness was inside. The girl said in a frightened voice that she thought he was talking about the director of the shelter, and the woman did not quite understand what she was talking about. Baroness Rondini was indeed the director of the orphanage, but Lilia was her relative, as was her husband. However, the girl spoke as if she were an ordinary pupil, which seemed a little strange. I wonder what their attitude is towards this little girl? She decided to leave it at that for now, and asked where the director of the shelter was now. The girl said that she couldn't even imagine that this woman was going to adopt her. After all, such a magnificent lady, as she would never take away such a handicapped child as she. The woman did not quite understand what the girl was talking about, and decided that perhaps she was referring to someone from another shelter. The girl added that if the lady is from another shelter, then she asks not to take her. Because of this, the woman was completely confused and did not understand what was happening. The girl said that she would certainly disappoint her because she worked poorly, her movements were awkward, and she also ate too much. If they take her away, they will have to spend a lot on food. And besides, there will be other problems with her. The woman looked closely at the girl, trying to understand what she was so afraid of. But the girl didn't answer. She just kept silent and tried to explain where the director was now. She also noted that the director said that other shelters were a living hell. The woman did not understand at all what was being discussed. The girl added that she was told that children there were beaten every day, especially those who could not work normally. They were hit in the face, and those who do not obey are placed separately from everyone else under arrest for a week. At least their shelter accepted a lazy girl like her, but if they send her somewhere else, they will beat her every day. The woman was completely horrified. She didn't even know how to react to it. It was just crazy, and she was literally seething with anger. She didn't understand what they had said to this little girl, and how an orphanage could treat children like that. It was more like a barracks. Besides, these terribly dirty and worn-out clothes are right on the girl, and the wound on her hands looks terrible too. I feel sorry for this child. She doesn't understand how this can happen. And in principle, no one knew that something like this still existed. It's a shelter where they take one child and treat him terribly. She said that, firstly, she has no connection with another shelter. The girl was very happy and even a little embarrassed. The lady also noted that she was generally a quiet girl and asked why she needed the director and why she was looking for her in particular. This girl is a child who deserves much better treatment than she is currently receiving. Once she gets out of here, she will meet people who will love her. And all this time she was imprisoned here, thinking that cruel treatment was natural. However, the truth was that the lady had come to take her away. She noted that she hadn't introduced herself yet, so she would do it now. The woman had warm hands. Now the girl knew what it was like to feel happy. It's a happy feeling when someone strokes your hair, like that. The lady said her name was Anastasia von Valois. The girl then thought that this lady had a very cool name, but then she got very scared when she realized it was Anastasia, the only duchy of its kind in the Valois Empire. The same Valois who can knock a flying bird out of the sky with just one look. She doesn't understand why such a great man wants to find her. The lady also noted that she is also the mother of Elliot von Valois, who is her fiancé. The girl was a little surprised when she heard this. Then the lady realized that she had accidentally blurted it all out at once. And then she noted that they would talk about this in more detail later. She didn't understand how she could have shocked such a kind and sweet child and her future daughter-in-law at that so much. So she decided that she would make everyone suffer, including Baron and Baroness Rondini. The inside turned out to be better than the lady thought. The wallpaper looked neat. The girl said that the hat could be taken off. Anastasia thought about the fact that the children here looked healthy. Maybe it's because they regularly do inspections here. Lily, on the contrary, looked more neglected than the other orphans. Anastasia was surprised when she saw the girl picking up trash. She came closer and noticed that she was cleaning and carrying dishes. So, naturally, she performs the duties of a servant. But she's only a 7-year-old child. Now she works non-stop to the point that it causes her pain. Acts as if it couldn't be any other way. All the information about the main character being abused was expressed in the novel in just one sentence. However, Lilia's hellishly difficult days cannot be described in just one phrase. This is probably why the main character has such a nasty feeling in her soul now. The girl said that they had already arrived, so the lady could go with her. When she knocked, the headmistress asked who had come. The girl said that it was she, Lilia, and that she wanted to tell her something. But before she could say anything, she screamed that she didn't want to see this useless creature. The woman was in complete shock, and the headmistress continued to yell at Lilia. She insisted that she should under no circumstances be disturbed when her daughter arrived. But when she saw the Duchess of Valois in front of her, her face distorted with surprise. The Duchess demanded that the headmistress take the trouble to explain the situation to her. The woman looked frightened, and Anastasia asked why the child, who would become her daughter-in-law, was not living in the Rondini mansion and is in such conditions in a shelter. The headmistress became nervous, but Anastasia did not back down and asked why Lilia, who was her relative, was not called an aunt, but the director of the orphanage, like an ordinary orphan. The woman suggested not to discuss it here and to move to a more secluded place. When she first saw the girl, she decided that she was the Baroness's daughter. The magnificent desserts were prepared especially for her. She didn't give Lily anything like that, and she fed her daughter only sweets. It's terrible to discriminate in food, so Anastasia decided to intervene. Nowadays, ladies seem to enjoy expensive desserts and aromatic tea. Lily was shocked, and the lady also noticed that the girl was dressed in beautiful, expensive clothes. After which, the Duchess turned and looked at the Baroness. She asked why Lilia's clothes were so shabby. Even the maids' outfits look better. The headmistress hastily declared that she would explain everything and would certainly correct it. The lady just smiled and asked again if she was really going to fix it. And then she asked if she really thought the Duchess would let her hush it all up after what she had seen. The woman was clearly nervous. Fear was evident on her face. It hadn't bothered her before, and now she didn't understand why this woman had appeared now. She spent so much money to shut everyone's mouths, and now everything is falling apart. She paid the maid, whom the Duke of Valois trusted most. She said that everything was under control, and the headmistress believed that they had agreed on everything. She also regularly sent good reports to the Duke of Valois. There was nothing that could cause problems, and suddenly this woman appears. While Anastasia was deep in her thoughts, the Duchess suddenly addressed her. She declared that from now on, she intended to take Lilia to her place and raise her independently without anyone's interference. The headmistress recoiled in horror, not understanding what was being said. She could not believe that the Duchess was seriously saying such things because Lily was her relative. But the lady calmly noted that if the conversation had already started, she would not just take the girl, but planned to become her mother-in-law in the future, hinting at a possible marriage. So, looking straight at the Baroness, she asked again if she really did not seem serious. Her tone was firm, almost challenging, as if she expected an objection. The Baroness was stunned, unable to find an answer right away. Anastasia also did not hide her surprise, but she was more amazed at why the woman was clinging to Lilia so desperately. After all, after everything she saw, after everything that happened, does she really still hope to keep the girl close to her? However, after a few moments, the woman exhaled and said that she would not do that again. If that was so, then the argument was over. She had nothing more to say. She added that Lilia would not do anything like that either. This matter is closed, and the girl is not going to change her decision. Her voice sounded confident, and she firmly noted that Lilia had no intention of leaving them, even if someone hoped otherwise. But her words sounded so strange that it became difficult to understand whether she was saying this sincerely or whether her whole being was denying reality. The Baroness could not stand it any longer and rushed to Lilia, clinging to her hands. She desperately repeated that they were family. She reminded that she raised the girl, took care of her. However, Lilia felt pain when the woman squeezed her hand too hard. The Baroness imploringly said that leaving was stupid and tried to convince the girl, asking if she really agreed to this. Anastasia, without wasting any time, approached the woman and told her directly to listen to her carefully because the situation was becoming more and more serious. She pointed out that right now, before this woman's eyes, she was trying to manipulate the child, which was completely unacceptable and needed to be stopped. The woman was completely confused, not understanding what was being discussed at all, because it seemed to her that there was no manipulation. She saw no reason for the accusations. But the girl clearly noticed how the woman imposed her will, claiming that she had raised the child. And this was clearly manipulation that could not be justified. Anastasia even regretted that the Baroness would no longer be able to demand money under the pretext of expenses for Lilia, because this game was already over. Moreover, she added ironically that now the woman will not be able to use Lilia to extort money as she did before, under various pretexts. The woman was horrified and could not accept this turn of events because Lily was something like prey to her, a valuable asset that could not be simply lost. In despair, she fell to her knees before the Duchess and began to ask her to take the girl to her because the situation had become too difficult for her. It was even more unpleasant to see how this woman, now after all the manipulations, suddenly began to ask for forgiveness, showing her true face. Anastasia did not want to waste any more time talking to this woman, so she turned to Lilia and asked her to step aside showing that everything had already been decided. She confidently said that in the future she wanted to be her housekeeper and live next to her, giving the girl the opportunity to make her choice, but leaving no room for doubt. Anastasia, with mild interest, asked what she thought about the girl and what she was going to do with her in order to understand her future intentions. However, Anastasia could not allow Lilia to stay in the place where she was abused, and it was unclear to her where she would now live. She wanted to respect the girl's choice, but if it did not match her expectations, then Anastasia was ready to give it up, offering other options for her. Lilia, determined, replied that this was not so, and that she would definitely go after Anastasia because she was sure that this was the right decision. Anastasia, having decided to go with the Duchess, noticed how her words sounded too loud, but she understood that nothing could be changed. She added that if it did not cause any inconvenience, she would gladly go with her, not wanting to be a burden to others. Anastasia thought about it, remembering that she had suggested going with her. She decided that there was no point in thinking about something that could become a burden. Then she smiled, offering to go together, and holding out her hand, waited for the girl to agree. Lily, slightly embarrassed, happily took her hand, unable to refuse such an offer. They approached the exit, and Anastasia, realizing that it was time to go, headed along with the girl holding her hand. It all seemed strange, and Lily felt that she couldn't believe what was happening. She thought that her life would be here in this place, and that she would not be destined to see anything new. Everything would be the same. This feeling of being trapped in a huge vicious circle did not give her any peace, and she could not get out of this state. But now, when she saw the clear sky, it seemed incredibly beautiful to her, and for the first time she felt freedom. The girl burst into tears, feeling the wind caressing her face, and she felt pleased by such unexpected freedom. Holding hands with Anastasia, Lilia felt safe, and it was very pleasant and comforting. Anastasia's warm, friendly hand gave her confidence and reassured her as if she were a part of something important. When Anastasia noticed that the girl was crying, her heart sank with sympathy, and she decided to find out what happened. Turning to her, Anastasia asked what caused the tears, but Lilia hastened to answer that everything was fine. Lilia admitted that she was crying with happiness, not realizing how much this new feeling of freedom and joy had shaken her. Asking for forgiveness, the girl embarrassedly tried to justify herself, but Anastasia squeezed her hand tightly, calming her down. She said that if Lily wanted to cry, she could do it as much as she wanted, but there were important things she needed to know. Anastasia confidently stated that Lilia would live happily in her house, and she should not doubt it. The girl, of course, agreed, and immediately smiled, realizing that she was being offered something interesting and exciting. There was a sparkle in her eyes. However, she soon noticed that everything that was happening was actually incredibly wonderful for her. It was even better than she expected. She also got the hint that this experience would open up opportunities for her related to money, but she didn't immediately understand what exactly was being referred to. After a few hours, the girl had changed and now looked very beautiful, which was noticeable to everyone who saw her. Her appearance became her pride. She asked cautiously if she could really wear the things she saw in the store, unsure if she should use them. Lily was an incredibly sweet and charming girl. If she could look like that, it was unclear who else could wear such things and look so dignified. The lady noted that of course such outfits should only be worn by Lilia, and she even helped her choose various costumes to highlight her beauty. She said that there was nothing to be done now because it all had to be as she had planned. There was no doubt about it. The woman asked that all the clothes for the girl that were available be given to her because she wanted to give a gift to Lilia. Lily replied that she could not accept so many clothes at once. It seemed to her that this was quite enough, and that the extra would only complicate the choice. She noted that in principle, what she had already chosen was enough for her because during the shopping process, she realized that the most important thing was not quantity, but style. Anastasia was sure that Lilia would find a way to persuade her, and in the end, she would buy everything she needed to improve her image. she had no doubt. She approached Lilia and gently told her that she needed to look at the situation with a cooler head and evaluate how she would appear to others. The lady reminded that Lilia, as the future mistress of the family, must think through every step. She asked how the Duke's bride would look in old shabby clothes. People will immediately start whispering. They will think that despite the family's wealth, they treat their only bride with disdain and even cruelty. Some people might think that the Duchess is too cruel and unfriendly, but Lily noticed that the Duchess is not as bad as she might seem. The lady smiled and asked if it was true that the Duchess did not deserve a bad reputation. She felt that Lily had hit the nail on the head. This was the right moment. She noticed that in such a case, Lilia simply had to dress herself in beautiful, decent clothes to create the right impression. It was a necessity. Lily realized that if she wanted to make the right impression on others about herself, then of course she had to agree and follow this advice. Now she promised herself that she would always wear only the best, so that everyone would see her as a worthy lady, worthy of attention and respect. The girl couldn't understand what was happening to her. She was tormented by a strange feeling that she had been drawn into something big and difficult. She couldn't figure out her feelings. It had already been decided that the rest of the clothes would be sent to the estate. So the lady and the girl began to pack up and leave. Their journey continued. Everyone present was stunned when they saw the lady walking with the girl. This combination suddenly attracted all eyes. The people saw the Duchess, and their faces were full of questions. They could not understand what was happening because it was the first time they had met such a girl. The girl, despite her small size, managed to get the Countess to hold her hand. This surprised everyone because the Duchess was rarely around children. Everyone who observed thought that what was happening was too unusual and could not find an explanation for what was happening in front of them. Those around could not help but notice how the situation was unfolding. They were curious about what had happened and what was hidden behind this unusual moment. And at that moment, they realized that the Duchess was looking at them. Her gaze was focused, and everyone felt their attention sharpen. Anxiety immediately crept into their hearts. They were afraid, not knowing how much the Duchess could hear and realize that problems had begun in their lives. The lady calmly stated that she had been watching them for some time now, without showing much emotion. This added even more tension to the air. The girls at that moment clearly realized that their problems had become much more serious. Panic seized them. They did not know what would happen next. However, the Duchess reassured them, saying that everything was fine and that she understood them. Her words were strangely comforting, but many questions still remained. The lady couldn't help but notice that Lily the girl was so cute that it was impossible to take your eyes off her. This was her personal opinion. She also said that now looking at the girl, she understands why everyone pays so much attention to her. She thought that her son was the cutest, but then another child appeared. The girls were completely perplexed. They did not understand what was being discussed and doubted whether it was really the Duchess in front of them or whether it was something else. When the girl saw the castle, her eyes were filled with delight. She could not hide her emotions. Everything was like a fairy tale, as if this place belonged to a princess. She noticed that the castle really did resemble the home of a real princess, with its majestic towers and wide windows. The lady watching her reaction only smiled. Little Lily was so cute that her heart literally melted from her sincere joy. As soon as they entered, the girl was literally shocked by what she saw. For her, it was a real palace, like in fairy tales about queens and empresses. She could not contain her emotions and said that this place was like the palace of the Empress herself, so luxurious and majestic. Lily was so spontaneous and sweet that the lady did not even know how to restrain her feelings. Looking at her, she felt something tender and touching. At some point, the lady felt a little sad for the girl. Her eyes showed naivety and tenderness, but perhaps also invisible pain. But at that moment, her attention was drawn to a boy who, in her opinion, looked no less frightened. He froze when he saw her, and she herself felt alarmed. The boy was so cute that the lady could hardly resist the urge to go up and hug him. She realized that she had to be careful with her feelings so as not to cause harm. She tried to calm down, realizing that her emotions needed to be under control so as not to create unnecessary problems or tension. The lady smiled at the boy, but was surprised by his reaction. He did not retreat as he had done before and did not hide, which was unexpected for her. A few hours ago, this boy had been afraid of her, and she clearly remembered his rapid escape when he saw her for the first time. However, now she noticed that the girl was looking at the boy with some strange interest. This look was filled with questions that she could not immediately understand. The boy looked puzzled as well, and they both stood there, hesitant, unsure of what to do next. The tension in the air was palpable. As they approached each other, neither of them dared to speak first. Instead, they simply stood there in silence, feeling a strange excitement. The lady couldn't help but smile at all this cuteness. The sight of two children who didn't even know how to communicate was incredibly touching. She almost forgot about everything when she looked at these children. Their sincerity and purity filled her heart with joy, despite the heaviness of the world around her. However, despite all this charm, the lady did not forget about her main goal. To survive, she could not afford weakness. Her life depended on the decision. Suddenly, she somehow shook herself, as if returning to reality, and took a step forward. The lady said decisively, to defuse the situation so that Lily could introduce herself. The boy, not expecting such a turn of events, was a little confused, but still said his name. "This is the younger Duke Elliot of Valois," he said with a slight bow. The girl, a little scared and shy, bowed back. She understood that she had to behave respectfully, even if her heart was still full of emotions. "Her name is Lily Everett," the girl said quietly, but confidently, trying to look dignified as she had been taught. The boy blushed with embarrassment. When he heard that Lilia was his fiancée, he felt awkward from such words and did not know how to react. They decided to just have fun, watching the guy blush. They were sure that his face would turn red, and he would not be able to hide his embarrassment. When the guy heard this, he was stunned. He didn't know that she considered him her fiancé. He was surprised that she said it like that. He was really surprised, admitting that it was true. He said that he had not known about it before, although he had guessed about her feelings. Although he didn't say it out loud, he himself didn't know that she was so beautiful. Thoughts of how much she meant to him flashed through his mind. She was serious when she told him he had to take care of her. It was written all over his face, and she was convinced of it. The boy was indeed embarrassed, but despite this, he agreed with her words. He understood that now he had to take responsibility upon himself. He stood before her, feeling the full weight of the moment, and was a little taken aback. The heroine's condition affected him more than he had expected. She smiled, assessing his behavior. She said that he was doing the right thing, and that was very important to her. But when the boy looked at her, his face changed. It seemed a little strange, and he himself did not know how to perceive it. He turned to the girl, and bending down quietly, asked if it was possible that his mother was angry or scolded her. He leaned over slightly, trying to be careful, and asked if maybe his mother had treated her wrong. The girl was stunned. She immediately changed her facial expression, showing that this thought greatly excited her. He noticed that perhaps she had said something that irritated his mother. He noted that she might be pushing her away. Anastasia heard their conversation, but she did not attach much importance to it. These are trifles that are difficult to do anything about. She decided not to interfere. Everything Anastasia had done during this time was not something she could fix in one day. She understood that changing her image to a positive one was difficult. Lilia countered that this was not true at all. She insisted that her mother had done nothing wrong that could affect her reputation. Elliot was surprised by her words. He asked again, not quite understanding what she was talking about and what exactly she meant at this moment. Lily, without hesitation, replied that it was precisely because of these actions that her mother was so good that she deserved only positive reviews. After saying this, Lilia became a little embarrassed and smiled slightly, feeling that her words were a little too open for such a moment. Anastasia, hearing this, also felt embarrassed. She covered her mouth with her hand, not expecting such a frank confession from her daughter. Lilia added that her mother had taken her from a terrible place and saved her from many troubles. She was grateful for this, not hiding her feelings. In addition, Anastasia personally chose the dresses that Lilia was wearing now. The girl felt her heart fill with gratitude for the care. Lily reiterated that her mother was simply wonderful, and that she could not even express in words how much she appreciated everything she had done for her. Anastasia was embarrassed by such a confession. She did not know that her daughter perceived her care and effort so well that she was so sincerely grateful to her. Lily, however, blushed even more as her stomach growled loudly. She looked awkwardly at the others, feeling ashamed of her unwitting intemperance. Anastasia, seeing this, realized that Lilia was hungry and, with a smile, said that they needed to go to the evening meal so that the girl could eat. At this time, the butler was already meeting the Duke, who had just returned. His face expressed fatigue, but he was ready to continue his duties. The Duke confirmed that he was fully back home. He was a little late, but explained that he had had a busy day and had not been able to complete everything on time. Alexei, hearing this, noted that today's affairs had indeed taken longer than he had planned. But despite this, he needed to maintain his composure. However, he added that he still needs to pay attention to how he looks and control his facial expressions so as not to create unnecessary problems. The butler noticed the Duke's fatigue. His physical condition was not hidden, even from his faithful servant. It became obvious to everyone who was nearby. The butler, accustomed to many years of service in this house, realized that the Duke was getting old. A simple look at his tired face told more than any words. When the butler and the Duke exchanged a few words about his son Elliot, the butler's surprise was noticeable. He did not expect the Duke to go to his study so quickly. Duke Alexei, realizing the importance of the matter, thought that there was still something to be completed. He could not afford to relax, so he asked the butler to bring him coffee. But the Duke, sensing that he had something important to discuss, also noted that there were some issues that needed attention. He was serious. Word spread quickly through the town. Once at the mansion, the Duchess brought Lady Lily with her. This news attracted the attention of everyone close to the house. When the Duke heard this, his face immediately changed. He asked again. He could not believe that his wife had actually made such a decision. Alexei was upset and clearly angry. He didn't understand what exactly his wife was planning and what it might mean for their family and everything he had built. The Duke could not understand what this woman was thinking. There was something in her eyes that remained a mystery to him. He could not find the key to her thoughts, but something else was important. Everything that was happening around him was becoming stranger and more unpredictable. Each new moment brought him even more confusion. She said that Lilia was treated like a servant and that the butlers behaved like subordinates. The Duke immediately realized that this was indeed true, and he could not help but agree. And then it bothered him that Meg had never mentioned it. In all these years, she had never said a word to him about it, and that was strange. The Duke suddenly remembered how the maid had constantly reassured him, saying that Lady Lily was fine, everything was fine, and there were no signs of trouble. The maid often repeated that the lady felt comfortable, that her life was going on without any particular problems. The Duke began to doubt the veracity of these statements, so he ordered his butler to find out the truth. He demanded that he find out any secrets that might be hidden behind these statements. The butler promised to carry out his order, but when he was about to leave, the Duke stopped him halfway. He needed to know something important. The Duke asked the butler to investigate the true state of affairs in the Imperial Tax Service. He was sure that they were also hiding important information. After that, he went to his son's room to check on him. His son's condition was important to him, and he could not ignore it. Elliot was fast asleep, his face looking so peaceful and innocent. The Duke felt warmth in his chest as he looked at his son and smiled softly. Many said that Elliot looked like him, but if you looked closely, you could see that the boy more closely resembled his mother, Anastasia. Elliot had a turned-up nose, small lips, and eyes like his mother's purple, like violets. These features caused the Duke to be especially touched. The boy woke up and was surprised to see his father next to him. He had not expected him to appear, and the Duke apologized, noting that he might have woken him. But the boy smiled and said that everything was fine. He added that his smile was exactly what he inherited from his mother. Elliot was exactly like his mother. It was obvious, even though the Duke had never seen her smile. The Duke dreamed that at least this child would always smile so sincerely and joyfully. He often watched him rejoicing at each of his innocent, bright smiles. At that moment, the father noticed that there was a mug on the boy's bedside table. He wondered what it could be and felt a slight worry. The boy said with a smile that he had been singing Coco. The father remembered that they had once again had a ban on sweets before bed and asked what had happened to Meg. He had questions for Meg about how she was handling Lily, but he basically knew that she had done a good job of being Elliot's nanny so far. He believed that without her help, Elliot would feel very lonely, and it would be difficult not only for him, but for the whole family. The boy noticed that it was not Meg who had brought him the cocoa, and his father asked who had given him the drink, continuing to study it. Then the boy replied that it was his mother who gave him cocoa. The answer surprised him, because his father did not expect her to do such a thing. The father was shocked and even a little frightened by this revelation. He felt that something was wrong, but did not know how to react correctly. He could not understand what was happening to his wife. Her behavior began to seem more and more strange to him, and this alarmed him every day. He couldn't figure out why she continued to do what she did. What thoughts were behind her actions? What motivated her at all? The Duke decided to stop asking himself these questions. At some point, it became clear to him that he could not control her behavior. He said he understood, and trying to calm himself, asked the boy if he was ready for bed. He was trying to bring the conversation back to a calmer direction. He praised his son for his behavior and advised him to go to bed quickly because it was already late and he needed to sleep. But despite his words, he still could not understand what was happening to his wife, and her behavior remained a complete mystery to him. He began to suspect that perhaps she had changed. Although it seemed unlikely, all these thoughts haunted him, making him hope for something that could not happen. But it was clear to him that this was impossible, and he shouldn't even waste his energy on it. He knew that such dreams shouldn't remain in his head. Throughout all this time, she had disappointed him more than once. He still continued to hope, although he understood that it was a stupid and senseless step on his part. Everything happened this way because she wouldn't change. She was always like this, and it was her nature. It was what made Anastasia different from others. Meg thought it was all nonsense. She couldn't believe that something like that was even possible. It seemed ridiculous and not worth paying attention to. She couldn't understand what had happened to the lady. Why had she suddenly started behaving like this when she had always been different? It was strange and unclear. It was unclear why she suddenly became so concerned about Elliot. Meg sincerely hoped that this would not continue and that everything would soon return to its place. The whole situation became even stranger when Anastasia came to the boy and told him not to worry. She brought him a cup of cocoa, like never before. The boy was completely shocked by this turn of events. He did not expect this. She only wished him good night, but for him, it was something incredible. After this, the boy, still confused, turned to his nanny and wanted to tell her something he could not understand what was happening, and decided to share his thoughts. He noticed that his mother seemed especially affectionate to him that day. This behavior was unusual for him, and he could not ignore it. Before, when he encountered her at night, he always felt her coldness and detachment. But today, everything was different. She did not get angry, but on the contrary, brought him warm cocoa. The nanny, after listening to him, looked at the boy carefully and said that perhaps now he would no longer have to suffer. She hoped that he would begin to feel better. The boy was surprised and asked what exactly she meant. He did not understand what she was talking about, and this only increased his confusion and questions. The nanny told him that he needed to think about how the lady usually behaved. He himself should have noticed that something had changed in her behavior. It was unclear why she had changed so abruptly in her attitude towards the younger gentleman. But the nanny believed that it could simply be a cunning plan or a temporary trick on her part. The nanny noticed that at first Elliot would hope for his mistress, but hopes might not come true, and he would suffer again. Because of this, she was worried about the boy. The boy was surprised and did not believe it at first, asking the nanny if it was really true. He could not understand why something bad awaited him in the future. The maid confirmed the nanny's words, adding that there was no need to worry too much because the nanny would always be with him, and she would try to protect him from all troubles. Elliot smiled and said that he was glad to hear that he was glad that there was someone who would take care of him, no matter what was going on around him. The nanny, agreeing with his words, added that it was as it should be. She tried to convince him that it was better for him to trust her rather than rely entirely on the mistress. In a conversation with the boy, she also asked if he was disappointed in his mistress because she did not show concern for him, but Lily was always important to her. The maid remarked that she could not even imagine how much pain the boy felt when he saw this. Her words sounded with pity and sympathy for his feelings, but Elliot didn't understand why he should be sad. He replied that it wasn't exactly like stealing a mother's love, and he didn't know what exactly he should be upset about. The boy thought about it. He didn't know how to explain his feelings exactly, but he felt inside that something was wrong, although he couldn't find the right words. Elliot said it didn't really look like a theft, so he didn't feel upset. He was sure it wasn't as bad as it seemed. The boy added that even if she treated him so coldly and cruelly, it did not give him a reason to treat other people the same way. He tried not to be like that. Of course, he would be lying if he said he wasn't sad. He felt something in his chest, but he kept hiding his true feelings, trying to be strong. But the way the lady cared for Lily really made Elliot happy. He felt that her kindness was genuinely helpful, and it made him a little happier. Lily was very beautiful, and Elliot couldn't help but notice it. He admired her appearance, but tried to hide it so as not to seem too open. After these words, the boy became very embarrassed. His face turned red, and he did not know how to react. The nanny, seeing his embarrassment, said that it was time to go to bed and that it would be better to give her the cocoa. The boy, surprised, said that he did not understand why he should do this. The nanny replied that in any case the cocoa had already cooled down and was no longer tasty, so there was no point in drinking it. However, the boy did not agree with her words and firmly stated that he would still drink this cocoa. It was important to him, despite the fact that it had lost its original warmth. The boy explained that it was the first cocoa his mother had ever brought him. It became a symbol of her care, even if it no longer tasted the same as it had at first. He added that it was still warm, though not as hot as before. Elliot tried to find some warmth and memories of his mother in it. Nanny was very angry when she heard this. She understood that Junior Master Elliot was starting to get attached to these little things, and something had to be done about it, urgently, so as not to complicate the situation. After this, there was a knock on the nanny's door, and she, without wasting any time, allowed entry, expecting that these would be ordinary official matters that she had to resolve. There were several maids standing at the door, who immediately turned to the head maid, conveying their news to her, clearly concerned about something important that they had just seen. The maids tried to explain the situation, but the nanny still did not understand what had happened. They said that they had seen the Duchess in the kitchen and were worried about her strange behavior. Earlier, when they spoke of the girl who had been brought in today, the maids already knew that she was from the Everett family. She was a child whose history was full of grief and ruined destinies. The girl, it turned out, was the younger Mr. Elliot's fiancée, and her presence became a vivid testimony to the tragedy that had affected the Everett family, leaving behind shattered lives. Apparently, the Duchess decided to ask for food to be prepared for this little girl. At such a late hour, perhaps, trying to make things at least a little better for her, in this difficult situation. One of the maids apparently heard how the Duchess personally bought the girl clothes and even shoes so that she would feel at least a little more comfortable in this house. The maids couldn't figure out what exactly had happened to her. Perhaps it was another of her whims, typical of her overflowing emotions, but the situation still looked strange. This began to irritate them because instead of calmly doing their job, they were now faced with additional responsibilities that seemed pointless and unnecessary. At that moment, there was another knock in the corridor, and the maids, visibly frightened, froze, expecting that it might be someone important who would come with new instructions. Once at the door, the lady looked at them mockingly and noted that they were clearly relaxed, enjoying the time. Although the situation clearly required a different approach and a more serious attitude, she was surprised to see how the maids were calmly passing the time, not noticing that in reality they had big problems in front of them that required immediate solutions and attention. The maids told Meg everything that had happened and noted that she was very angry. The discussion of Lady Lily had aroused her anger. They did not feel guilty and asked Meg to intercede for them. It was a story about how they were caught gossiping. Meg said she was willing to help, but only on condition that she knew how their mistress had punished them. She was willing to intervene. She asked how their mistress had punished them and promised to help as much as she could. All she could do was support the maids in this situation if they were really guilty. The maids said that this time the mistress had forgiven them. They could not believe that the same mistress who had always treated people cruelly could let them go without punishment. Meg was surprised by her mistress's indulgence towards those who gossiped behind her back. She realized that this was not quite typical of her strict and imperious behavior, and she felt wary. The maids were worried that if this situation continued, the mistress would start doing housework herself, and this would complicate their lives. Meg could not help but take this into account. As Meg had suspected, the change in her mistress's behavior should not be ignored. Even if others did not notice, she, as the head maid, sensed that something was going on. She still retained her status as head maid, but her position was now under threat. This was the result of the mistress gradually changing her approaches to running the house. At first, the Lady the Duchess had not been interested in the affairs of the house, but now if she continued in the same spirit, she would begin to control everything. This could radically change Meg's situation. If the mistress took over the management of the household, Meg's position, which she had built up over the years, could be seriously weakened. This created a feeling of anxiety in her. Meg couldn't concentrate because she had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. She wanted to know what exactly had happened, but the maids said that they knew nothing about the events that were unfolding. They confirmed that they did not understand what was happening. Previously, they did everything that the lady said, and everything was calm. But now she was going to give them too much work, and this frightened them. The head maid stood up and calmed everyone down, telling them not to worry. She assured them that everything would be fine, and that it was all temporary. Meg decided not to worry anymore. She knew she wouldn't let this go unnoticed, and decided she needed to take action. She was confident she could handle it, and wouldn't be afraid of what was coming next. Everyone was happy when they realized that the head maid had agreed to help them. This gave them hope that with her help, they would be able to cope with the difficult situation. She noticed that even if she invited just one person, the work for the servants would become much more, and they would all be forced to work harder than before. Agreeing with her words, they realized that no one could understand them the way the head maid could. She was always there and knew all the peculiarities of their work. She also noted that it would be better to trust her, since her experience and knowledge could help to understand the current situation and make their tasks easier. Suddenly, the maid noticed that they were starting to get very worried, and approaching them, she asked them again what was worrying them so much in order to find out the reasons for their anxiety. She said that the head maid was the only one who could be trusted in such matters. Besides, she had been almost a friend of the Duke since childhood, which added to her authority. They couldn't understand why the maid couldn't do anything about the situation, because they knew how close she and the Duke were. This left them confused and worried. Meg stressed that such conversations should not be spread left and right, and the maids should understand this because unnecessary rumors can only do harm. Meg knew she might have exaggerated a bit, but she didn't know how to proceed. The situation was complicated, and her indecision only increased her anxiety. She couldn't figure out how to make the lady cool her attitude towards the family again, because she was sure that there must be some way to change the situation. In the morning, the lady woke up and felt a strange movement, as if something was moving under the blanket. She did not immediately understand what exactly it was, and was slightly surprised. After that, she realized why her blanket was moving. It was because someone was lying next to her, and she immediately decided to find out what was going on. Latochka was lying next to her, fast asleep, and everything looked so peaceful that she couldn't help but smile. Latochka was sleeping nearby, and her presence in the room created a feeling of warmth and comfort. The lady was touched because it was such a sweet sight that she could not ignore it. She felt a little embarrassed. Latochka was so sweet, and last night she came to her, asking to stay because she was afraid to be alone without her mother. Anastasia, noticing how worried Lilia was, quietly said that she understood her feelings. She offered the girl to spend the night next to her so that she would feel calmer. In the evening, they found themselves in the same bed, where Anastasia carefully arranged Lilia, covering her with a blanket. The girl finally fell asleep. Anastasia felt worthy of her mother. There was pain in her eyes, and she couldn't hold back her tears. These tears weren't from grief, but from the fact that she was able to give Lilia the safety and warmth that she so needed. Remembering how her life had collapsed at the beginning, Anastasia felt that moment bring her peace. She was ready to become a villain for everyone, but not for Lilia. Lily woke up early in the morning and immediately noticed her mother's gaze. Her bewilderment did not last long. She thought that perhaps Anastasia was angry because she woke her up, but the girl soon realized that this was not the case. She asked her mother how she had slept, genuinely interested in her condition, and trying to build a conversation that would dispel the tension. Anastasia was almost taken aback by the unexpected question. Her face did not betray any emotion, but inside she felt the nervous tension growing. She was not ready for this. For a moment she hid her feelings behind a cold and calm expression. She had worn these masks since she was young, and maybe that was why she was grateful for this moment. Lily was grateful to be transferred into the body of her mother-in-law, who, despite her cruelty, offered the girl to spend time at breakfast. It was unexpected and pleasant. Lily, despite the invitation, replied that she had eaten well yesterday and did not feel hungry. She was in no hurry. Her body did not yet require food, but it was nice to hear the offer. The lady, noticing her answer, realized that the girl was not hungry. After all, before they fell asleep, they had also drunk cocoa, which quenched her thirst, and now she did not want to eat. Anastasia, interested, asked what Lilia would like to do that day, but the girl did not immediately understand what was being discussed, asking again with bewilderment, waiting for an explanation. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before, and the girl was confused. She didn't know what to answer because she wasn't used to such questions. She just didn't understand what was required. Lilia felt how important it was to answer, and decided not to keep her mother waiting. She stood up and began to search for words to somehow satisfy her expectations, not even understanding what to answer. Lily noticed Anastasia looking at her with a smile. The girl felt that her mother's gaze was full of expectation, but she did not know what exactly she wanted to hear from her at that moment. In the end, Lilia said that she just wanted to be near her mother. It was sincere because she didn't need anything else. She just wanted to spend time with Anastasia. Anastasia was a little surprised, and smiling softly, asked if that was really all. The girl just wanted to be close. It seemed to her that there was something more to it than it seemed. Lilia clarified that if she interferes, nothing will change. She is not going to cause inconvenience. She will just be there, not demanding attention, but always close to her mother. Lilia confidently added that sometimes being close is enough. She did not demand more than just her mother's presence, because for her it was important and sufficient to be happy. Anastasia gently stroked Lilia's head, feeling the warmth and closeness. She told the girl that she was also very happy to spend time with her, enjoying every moment. Anastasia added that if Lilia stays nearby, it will make her much happier, and she will definitely not interfere. On the contrary, her presence will only brighten the day. Lily smiled, feeling her heart filled with joy. She replied that she would be happy to stay with Anastasia because she enjoyed being in her company. Anastasia, stroking the girl's hair, thought about what they should do. She wanted to choose something exciting that would bring joy and satisfaction to both of them. She was looking for something safe, kid-friendly, but not too boring. Something that would be interesting for both her and Lilia. Something that would create an atmosphere of fun. After thinking for a long time, Anastasia came to the conclusion that the ideal activity could be something sweet and crunchy, which almost all children like. It seemed like a great idea. With a smile, Anastasia turned to Lilia, offering to bake cookies together. She was sure that this activity would bring joy and create a special atmosphere. Lily responded immediately, agreeing with great enthusiasm. Anastasia noted how quickly the girl responded, and it made her think about her selfless willingness. She asked Lilia again if she had really thought about it before agreeing. Anastasia joked that even if she had suggested doing something less interesting, like weeding, Lilia would have agreed anyway. Anastasia, watching the process, could not help but notice how great what they did turned out. It seemed that all the efforts were justified, and the result exceeded expectations. Lily looked with delight at the cookies they had just made. Her eyes were shining with happiness, and she could not hide her admiration for the result. The girl, barely containing her surprise, exclaimed how amazing it was that from simple ingredients, one could create something so beautiful and cute to look at, and most importantly, delicious. Her happiness was obvious, and Anastasia could not help but be touched by how sincerely Lilia rejoiced, because for her, it was a special moment that remained in her memory for a long time. Finding herself in the kitchen without maids, Anastasia realized that this was a very good decision. Having freed up space for their joint work, she felt real harmony. At that moment, something strange suddenly caught Anastasia's attention. It was something unexpected, but something elusive made her turn her head. She noticed that Elliot, who had fallen awkwardly along with his books, was where he was not expected. Moreover, the air around him was filled with a sweet smell that Elliot himself did not recognize. Elliot, noticing her gaze, suddenly burst into tears, apologizing Anastasia. Not understanding why he was apologizing so much, did not want him to worry about something that did not happen. She approached him and asked him why he was apologizing. He hadn't done anything wrong. Besides, he had fallen himself, and not because of anyone else. Everything was fine, but she was still interested. The boy, quickly wiping away his tears, replied that he had accidentally dropped the book. He hadn't fallen. Everything was fine. His words were calm, but there was uncertainty hidden in them. After these words, he stood up, smiled at his mother. His face became more confident, and she noticed how his eyes filled with light again. He thanked her sincerely for the cocoa she had given him yesterday. It was a small but warm confession that warmed her heart, just like that drink in the moment of winter cold. She couldn't help but notice how cute he looked at that moment. Her hands almost reached out to kiss his cheeks, but she held back, knowing she had to control herself. Anastasia laughed, looking at him, and said that there was no need to thank her for such a trifle. For her, it was enough that he enjoyed the cocoa with pleasure. It wasn't some kind of big test, not some kind of endurance training, and it was hard to even call it anything more significant. Everything was simple and sincere, and that made her happy. At this point, Lily came up to them, noticing how Elliot was looking at their cookies with confusion. She cheerfully said that he probably came to them, attracted by the sweet smell. Lily offered him a cookie if he wanted it. She was even willing to treat him generously, suggesting that he not be shy and enjoy what they had prepared. The boy was a little embarrassed, and of course agreed. He was pleased, but he was still a little lost in this situation, not knowing how to behave correctly. He picked up the cookie and started tasting it, but once the taste hit his mouth, he was completely shocked at how delicious and unusual it was. The cookies were truly incredibly tasty. They crunched on his teeth, and the boy couldn't help but wonder how such a simple thing could be so delicious. Anastasia also could not hide her surprise and joy. She herself felt a little embarrassed that such a simple gesture caused such a reaction in the boy. Lily, seeing the boy's reaction, turned to her mother, saying that the boy said that the cookies were simply delicious. This was pleasant and touching for both women. After that, Anastasia suggested making more cookies and sharing them. Liliana was so kind and innocent that she could easily accept such kindness in any situation. Liliana, of course, was ready to share with others because she was a real angel, and even Anastasia could not help but notice how easily she managed to be so kind and caring. But first, it was necessary to finish what had already been prepared. Anastasia thought that Liliana really looked like an angel, and her soul was so pure and bright. Anastasia then turned to the boy, asking what was bothering him. She noticed that he was a little embarrassed and seemed to be hesitating whether to continue the conversation. He was a little embarrassed, but then asked if he could share these cookies with his dad. It was obvious that he wanted his dad to be able to feel this moment too. Anastasia, having thought about it, was even a little afraid to imagine how Alexei would react to this. She was not sure whether he would be so positively disposed to such a small joy. She wasn't sure if she should let him try the cookies, but she knew it would probably be better to have someone pass them to him than to do it herself. But if Elliot took it upon himself, she was sure he would start saying that the boy was just some kind of weirdo, and that she had harnessed him as a messenger boy. So passing the cookies wasn't the best option. Anastasia felt it would bring more inconvenience than joy, especially if she didn't do it very carefully. Then she said she agreed and decided to take the cookies herself. It had to be done quickly to finish everything, and she was ready to make a decision. The boy was surprised that Anastasia decided to take the cookies herself. He was ready to help, but she insisted that it was better to do it herself and promised that the maid would do everything. Anastasia was so absorbed in her thoughts that she did not even notice how her actions became more and more decisive. She was far from the thought of the servant despite its reality. She stood by the door, thinking maybe it would be best to just leave the cookies nearby and go. After all, he would find them anyway, wouldn't he? The solution was simple, but deep down, she was unsure whether she should leave. Why delay the inevitable? They were going to meet face to face anyway, so why wait? In the end, she decided to leave the cookies where she was. Suddenly, the Duke asked who it was, and if anyone had business, they should come in. Interestingly, he noticed her. She stood motionless, but the Duke, like an experienced warrior, sensed her presence. It was not surprising to him. He was good at his job, and his intuition did not fail him. When he was told that it was Anastasia, he was a little taken aback. He hadn't expected to see her here, especially at such a moment. It made him think. His surprise did not disappear. He did not think that Anastasia would decide to visit him in person. It was unexpected, but at some point he realized that it could be important. He began to suspect that perhaps she was having financial difficulties and needed help, so he invited her in, so as not to ignore the situation. She walked in, and they stood there in silence for a moment. The quiet atmosphere seemed to speak volumes. It was difficult for both of them to start a conversation, but they both knew it was inevitable. At one point, she felt herself suffocating with excitement. The cookies needed to be put somewhere, but she needed to get out as soon as possible. It was hard to linger. Having placed the cookies on the table, the Duke asked what they were. His interest was obvious. He wanted to understand what kind of gesture she had made by bringing this gift. He was not curious but rather cautious. She replied that it was just cookies, but the Duke, smiling, noted that he understood that perfectly well. He knew that she had brought them, but he still decided to clarify in order to understand the motive. His question was simple, but he was trying to understand not only the content, but also the intention. He wanted to know why she had brought these cookies and not someone else. She expected him to ask about it, but she still found it a little strange that he would raise the question. After all, it was obvious. She brought it for him to eat. However, despite this, the Duke knew perfectly well that her visit was not limited to cookies. He was sure that she had come to ask for money, and this was clear, although no one said a word. He was impatient. They wanted to hear her request as soon as possible. Cookies conversations. All this was not as important as her main intention. He did not like to waste time. The lady, with a slight smile on her lips, asked him to listen, assuring him that there was no poison in these cookies and that she had not mixed anything dangerous in them. Her voice was calm and confident. She couldn't understand what kind of person could use food for such purposes, but she still decided not to say anything or focus on it, although it surprised her. The woman noted with a slight reproach that there was no need to look at her with such a stern expression on his face, because in front of him was just a simple cookie and not something threatening. The Duke, looking down, replied that he did not mean that and asked if she had come with any real intentions. He wanted to understand why she had decided to bring these cookies. It was strange to her that he doubted her intentions because she really just brought cookies. She understood that her actions could seem suspicious. However, she did not consider it necessary to focus on these words. There was no point in explaining every action she took if he did not want to believe in her sincerity and intentions. She could not help but remark and turn to the Duke, noting that he was too rude to her. She tried to be kind, but his coldness was becoming more and more obvious. She brought him cookies with sincerity, and while it might have been a treat for the Duke, it was special for her. She had made them with Lilia, and that was a big deal. She knew he probably hated her, but she didn't want him to disregard Lilia's sincerity. Even if he didn't share her feelings, she believed in the strength of their friendship. The Duke asked again if she had really made the cookies herself, and the lady could not understand what exactly the problem was. She had not expected such a question. Then the Duke realized that Anastasia had actually made these cookies herself, and now he felt a little awkward because he suspected her of something bad. He fell silent, and the lady, as if trying to relieve the tension, said that since he hated the treat so much, he could throw it away since she had done her job anyway. The Duke was very surprised by her words and asked her to wait, and then, to her surprise, called her his wife. It sounded unexpected, and she did not know how to react to it. She was stunned by his words, and he, seeing her surprise, admitted that he had indeed been rude to her. He had not meant for her to feel that way. The Duke, realizing how wrong he had been, apologized to her for his words and actions, feeling that his behavior was far from how he usually behaved. It was quite unusual to watch people worship icons. It was always a strange and unfamiliar sight to her, but now she watched it with surprise. The lady felt a little nervous, realizing that this situation was not at all as she expected. She did not even think that she would hear this from him, and it confused her a little. When she looked at him, she could tell he was feeling uneasy too. His face was confused, and his gaze was fixed on the floor as if he didn't know what to do. He looked a little nervous, which made her smile again. It was so familiar. She had felt something similar in this situation. She smiled weakly, realizing that the situation was not so different from her own experiences. He was confused, and she was in a similar situation. Alexei, as always, did not communicate with her, being absorbed in business. He was so often immersed in sorting out documents that it seemed to be becoming a habitual state for him. The lady noticed this, realizing that he was probably very tired. Work was absorbing him, and she could not shake the feeling that he had not known what rest was for a long time. She heard that yesterday there was so much work that despite coming home late, he continued to do his work, not allowing himself even a minute of rest. She even thought about how there were always things to do in the estate that needed attention. The work never ended, and for him, it seemed there was never a moment to relax. The Duke was somewhat puzzled by the lady's offer. He did not understand what exactly she meant when she said that she could help him with his affairs, and this clearly confused him. His surprise was quite justified. He could not believe that it was really his wife Anastasia who had offered her help. He felt that this did not quite fit into his ideas. Anastasia, meanwhile, understood how hard it was to work endlessly, return home, and immediately continue working. She believed that such a life was too harsh and unfair. She felt very sorry for Alexei. She felt how hard these days were for him. But he always assured her that everything was fine, and said that he was grateful for her care, although the fatigue was on his face. The Duke was so confused that he tried to end the conversation as quickly as possible. He knew that the lady would probably not be able to help, as it required specialized knowledge. The lady decided it was time to leave. She informed the Duke of this, and he without objection agreed. He did not interfere, realizing that her decision was final. Before she left, she did tell him that he hadn't really overdone it. It sounded like an attempt to reassure him, though it was a bit unexpected. The Duke was taken aback by her words. He had not expected to hear this, but the lady added that health was the most important thing. She stressed the importance of taking care of yourself, despite the situation. From the very beginning, the lady had been worried about him. And now, when she left, her words about the expenses for whims remained unspoken. She left without discussing unnecessary details. She perceived everything as if through the prism of another person. But it was unlikely that her soul had truly changed. However, her actions were so changeable that it made one wonder. He couldn't understand at all what exactly had happened to make her behavior change so much. Everything was happening quickly, and every step she took seemed mysterious, unlike her usual behavior. He stopped looking at the cookies and couldn't believe that she had made them herself. It was amazing because she had never shown such skill before, and he was stunned. He decided to try the cookies, and remembering her words when she mentioned that she hadn't added anything to them, he thought about it. Many questions arose in his mind. It made him smile. He couldn't help but chuckle, feeling a little lighthearted about the moment. The cookies weren't that bad, and his reaction was almost funny. When Elliot tasted the cookie, he immediately noticed that it was incredibly sweet. The taste literally exploded on his tongue, but for some reason he liked it. Lilia thought that her mother Anastasia was simply an incredible woman. She was always special to her, and in her eyes there was no one more beautiful and intelligent. Lilia noted that she had never met anyone as wonderful as her mother. For her, Anastasia was the best woman in the world. Elliot thought that if someone had heard all these enthusiastic stories from Lilia, they would probably have thought that Anastasia was her real mother, and not just a woman who took care of her. The boy couldn't help but ask why Lilia loved and admired her mother so much. He sincerely couldn't understand what made her admire Anastasia so much. Lily was surprised by this question because she had not thought about it. Elliot noticed that she always said only good things about Anastasia, and this seemed strange to him. He couldn't understand why Lilia admired Anastasia so much. There was not a single negative side to her stories, and this made him wonder about her feelings. The thing is that with him, Mother Anastasia is completely different. She was not like everyone else, and it was her attention and care that made him feel different. The girl was shocked by this and did not know what to answer. She simply remained silent, not knowing how to explain her feelings towards Anastasia, whom she considered an amazing person. But then, Lilia lowered her eyes and quietly said that for her, her mother was a real super person. She was the first one who showed her care and attention when no one noticed. Anastasia was the first woman who accepted Lilia as her own, cared for her, and was truly interested in her wishes. She was an example for her of how to be strong and kind at the same time. Lilia remembered how her mother first took her hand when she felt lost. It was so important to her that these moments became a symbol of hope and care for her. Anastasia was also the first to ask Lilia what she really wanted and helped her find something they could do together. She wasn't afraid to be there for her and support her. Lilia believed that a person like Anastasia was like a miracle that came from heaven. She was not just a mother to her, but a real miracle that brought light into her life. Elliot understood her. He sighed and said that now he understood why she admired Anastasia so much. It all became clear when he thought about her words. If he thought about it, Elliot noticed that his mother had really changed a lot lately. She became more open, reached out to him, tried to talk, to give him something. He remembered how Anastasia herself had brought him cocoa yesterday, trying to establish contact, but it had been so unexpected that he had found it hard to believe that a person could change so much. Elliot thought for a moment and then looked at Lilia. She looked strange, as if she was hiding something, and her gaze was such that he couldn't understand what exactly she was feeling at that moment. Elliot realized that he had been deep in thought and had completely forgotten to pay attention to Lilia, despite her presence. He had been absorbed in his thoughts, not noticing her condition. Lily looked upset, as if she felt that her actions or words might be the cause of his mood. It bothered her, but she didn't know how to fix it. He understood her concern and tried to calm her down, saying that it was okay. It didn't matter. He said he was just thinking a little, but Lilia's feelings didn't go away. Lilia replied that she had simply forgotten about the situation all this time and had said too much for which she was a little ashamed. She tried to justify herself, but still felt guilty. Elliot realized that maybe he couldn't fix the situation anymore. But since things had turned out this way, he had to act and try to make Lilia happy. There was only one option left: to dispel her sadness and try to make her mood better. He decided that there must be some activity that she would enjoy. With determination, he offered Lilia to play with her, hoping that it would help change her mood and distract her from her heavy thoughts. He himself was ready to have a little fun. Lily was a little surprised by this proposal, but she still agreed. They started playing with the plush toys that were on the shelf. She smiled, relaxing a little. They played with the bears, pretending they were princesses in a bear kingdom where everything was magical. Elliot felt the game was exciting, despite the strangeness. Elliot didn't understand why he disliked playing with dolls so much, but despite this, he tried to be involved in the process so that Lily wouldn't feel lonely. He didn't like these games, but Lilia noticed that it was her first gift, a special toy from her mother. It was a moment she treasured and wanted to share. Lilia explained that her mother had bought her these toys. She was proud of them because they had been given with love. It was something important to her, and she wanted to show them to Elliot. Elliot couldn't resist playing because he knew how much these toys meant to Lilia. She believed that his participation in the game would help make her day a little brighter. Elliot denied everything, assuring Lilia that he was fine. She suggested going to the hospital, worried about his well-being, but he insisted that there was nothing serious. At that moment, Anastasia came up to them. She didn't immediately understand what was happening, but she saw the children playing, and it was so cute that her heart filled with warmth. Watching little children playing with dolls was so touching that Anastasia could hardly contain her emotions. It seemed so pure and tender that her heart almost broke. Lily was very happy when she saw that her mother had already returned. The lady was simply delighted to watch the children playing with dolls. She smiled, seeing how Lily, with a serious expression on her face, adjusted the dress of one of the dolls, and Elliot, although embarrassed, still took part in the game. Lilia confidently confirmed that the game was going well, but she also noticed that Elliot looked a little strange. His gaze was absent-minded, and his movements were a little stiff, as if he felt out of place. Anastasia felt relieved and happy, because now Elliot no longer runs away as soon as he sees her. He doesn't hide behind the servants, doesn't pretend to be busy with something important, but simply stays close, although he looks a little uncertain. With a smile on her face, Anastasia said that it was really great. She nodded approvingly and added that she would gladly join them if they didn't mind. When the Duke entered the room and saw what his wife and children were doing, he literally froze in shock. Never before had he seen Anastasia in such a setting, and especially so enthusiastically playing with toys. Anastasia, without a shadow of embarrassment, declared that she was the king of demons, after which she proudly sat down next to the children and began to play with soft toys, entering into the role with complete dedication. Lilia, watching this with narrowed eyes, said with complete seriousness that she should be more careful and leave the Demon King to her, since she knew better than anyone how to deal with him. Elliot readily agreed to this, succumbing to the general excitement of the game. But the Duke continued to stand, not understanding what kind of strange situation this was. and how his wife had managed to fit into it. He looked at what was happening and could not believe his eyes. His wife, the majestic and reserved Anastasia, was sitting right on the floor, playing with dolls, and at the same time looked completely natural, as if this was a normal thing. But at that moment, he heard the joyful voice of his son, who, noticing his father, instantly lit up with a smile and immediately rushed towards him to share his delight. Perhaps it all seemed like some strange dream, but Elliot's voice, full of genuine happiness, dispelled all doubts. This is reality, and not just some ridiculous fantasy. Anastasia, seeing Alexei, tensed up and even turned slightly pale. She hadn't expected him to be here and had no idea what he would think about all this. The girls were playing so well that the atmosphere in the room resembled something magical. But his appearance spoiled everything. However, she did not show it, only smiled in surprise, and noted that she did not expect to see him again. The Duke, watching what was happening, was sure that they were playing with dolls, without even trying to understand the essence of their occupation. The lady calmly confirmed his guess, but there was a hidden interest in her voice. She was curious about what made him come here, so she politely asked about the purpose of his visit. The Duke, as if doubting the necessity of this conversation, coughed briefly, as if collecting his thoughts, and then announced that he had not come here by chance. A moment later he grinned, and with a hint of mockery in his voice, explained that he had come here specifically to express his gratitude. The lady froze for a moment, not believing her ears. Was he really here just to thank her? She asked again, wanting to make sure she had understood him correctly. The Duke confirmed his words with unexpected sincerity, adding that he was grateful to her for the cookies she had brought. These words caused the lady a slight embarrassment. She was not used to such attention from him, and her cheeks slightly turned pink. She felt uneasy, not understanding why there was such a strange atmosphere in the air. Everything that was happening confused her. Suddenly, the Duke sat down next to them, and she was overcome with shock. This behavior was unusual, and his closeness made her tense. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. He was too close, and it was confusing her, creating mixed feelings. Leaning close to her ear, the Duke quietly said that he was sincerely grateful to her for sorting out Lily's problems. He emphasized his gratitude once again, as if he wanted her to remember his words exactly. The lady recoiled sharply, as if his words had burned her, and blushed with embarrassment, not knowing how to react. Alexei watched her with slight bewilderment, not understanding what caused her reaction, while she herself tried to hide her fear. Mrs. Anastasia looked at the Duke carefully and remembered that he was seeing Lilia for the first time. She gently reminded the girl that it would be polite to introduce herself and say hello. Then, turning to Alexei, she thanked him for allowing her and Lilia to live in this mansion. It was important to her, and she wanted to express her gratitude. Anastasia's eyes stung slightly. The girl was so sweet, her face literally glowed with excitement. This sight touched her, but at the same time caused a strange pain. The Duke merely nodded briefly, in response, his face unreadable. He calmly replied that he understood her feelings, but said nothing more. Then he turned, and without showing any emotion, walked away confidently. His steps echoed in the silence, leaving behind a feeling of coldness and alienation. Anastasia was dumbfounded. Was that really all? Not the slightest sign of warmth, not a spark of emotion, just a cold departure, as if nothing important had happened. She expected at least the slightest smile, but even the sight of Lilia, so sweet and timid, did not cause anything on his face except the usual severity. She had nothing to say. Elliot, noticing this scene, came up to his father. He couldn't understand how he could remain so emotionless while looking at Lily. He quietly said that sometimes it was worth smiling. He added that with such a stern expression on his face, the father could frighten Lilia. The girl was already having a hard time, and now she would probably feel even more insecure. The Duke stopped. He was completely stunned to hear this from his own son. It had never occurred to him that his expression could frighten anyone. He couldn't help but touch his face in confusion, not understanding what exactly was wrong with it. Was it really as scary as Elliot said? He thought that perhaps he just had stern features, but then both Anastasia and Elliot confirmed his guess, which stunned him even more. The Duke was amazed that even his wife agreed with his son. He sighed and said that he would try to pay more attention to this in the future. Suddenly, Lilia turned to him, her voice quiet but firm, and he turned to look at her again. The girl said timidly that she didn't want him to change for her. She didn't care whether he smiled or not. She was just ready to get used to it. She added that even if she was scared, sometimes she would try to cope. There was no complaint or fear in her voice, only determination. Anastasia, hearing this, could not hold back her laughter. She said that Liliana should not put up with such an attitude, and that she did not need to endure fear. Elliot listened attentively to the conversation, and then confidently supported his mother, agreeing with her words. He believed that she was absolutely right, and this time too. The boy noted that Lilia should not hide her fears if she was truly afraid. However, the Duke did not fully understand why there was such an unusual atmosphere in the room now. Anastasia, as if nothing had happened, said that it was time to go to dinner. At that moment, something seemed to change in the air. It became warmer, and the Duke could not understand what it was connected with. She then turned to Alexei and invited him to join them for dinner, as if the conversation and tension from a moment ago simply didn't exist. The Duke thought about her words, taking them in, understanding their meaning. He was a little surprised, but did not say anything, and just remained silent. When he finally agreed, Anastasia froze for a moment. She expected a completely different answer, and she was overcome with fear because she was sure that he would refuse. Alexei noticed her reaction and asked why she was so surprised. He couldn't understand why she had decided in advance that he would refuse dinner. Anastasia quickly found an answer and assured him that it was not about that at all. She was just really happy that he agreed. After that, she turned to Elliot, noticing his intense gaze, and with slight surprise asked why he was looking at her like that. The boy did not hide the truth and admitted that she now looked truly happy. Anastasia only nodded affirmatively, agreeing with him. She smiled wider, not even realizing how genuine it was. Her joy was natural, and everyone around her felt it. Her warm, sincere smile made the surrounding atmosphere brighter and more comfortable. Her joy seemed to be transmitted to everyone around her. The Duke could not deny it. He understood and acknowledged it. But still, it was incredibly difficult for him to accept such changes. Now he had to admit the obvious. Anastasia had really changed. She was no longer the same as before, and there was no point in denying it anymore. But what was even more surprising was the atmosphere around it suddenly stopped being tense and oppressive. On the contrary, now there was something warm and even pleasant in it. Elliot turned around and suddenly noticed his father smiling. He froze for a moment, not believing his eyes. Was this even possible? After dinner, the butler bowed respectfully to the lady and reported that everything had already been put in order in the room intended for Lady Lily. The furniture was arranged, the bed was made, the toys were neatly laid out. Now the room belonged to her, and Lilia could not contain her joyful excitement. Everything here was new, clean and beautiful. Anastasia approved of her delight with a smile and suggested that they go and see it together. Elliot immediately raised his head and said that he also wanted to see what his sister's room was like now. He was curious because it meant that Lily would now be living separately. Anastasia did not object, allowing her son to go with them. The Duke thoughtfully added that he was also interested in taking a look. After all, this was the girl's first personal room, and everything should be carefully examined. Her husband's words confused Anastasia a little, but she saw no reason to refuse. Let him go if he wants. She nodded in agreement, and the whole small procession went to Lilia's room. When the girl walked inside, she literally froze in place. The spacious, bright room, the soft pillows, the beautiful toys, everything was simply amazing. She didn't even know what to say. The Duke, having looked around the room, noticed that it was quite cozy, but it would not hurt to add a few details. He suggested decorating it with flowers or hanging ribbons to make it look even more lively. Anastasia shook her head slightly, thinking that everything was already too lush. In her opinion, more decor would make the room overloaded. Even now it seemed excessive. Lily, still shocked, suddenly looked at her mother with slight excitement. She was clearly thinking about something, but could not bring herself to say it out loud. Finally, plucking up her courage, she admitted that since she now had her own room, it probably meant that she would no longer be able to sleep next to her mother. Anastasia was simply amazed. She was surprised how Lilia, so small and fragile, could be so sincerely worried. This girl seemed to have put her whole soul into her experiences. Seeing her confusion, Anastasia decided to calm her down. She pretended not to understand what was being discussed and suggested that if Lilia wanted to, she should sleep with her. She thought the girl would feel calmer that way. Then she turned to the Duke, hoping for his confirmation. After all, their rooms were separate, so it shouldn't be a problem. She wanted to make sure she was doing the right thing. The Duke looked puzzled for a moment. He didn't immediately understand what his wife was talking about, but once he got the gist of it, he nodded, confirming her words. He didn't see anything special in it. He calmly stated that his wife was telling the truth. This seemed to calm the lady down, and she was clearly pleased. Lily, in turn, seemed almost happy. However, a strange feeling stirred within the Duke. He could not understand why this seemingly insignificant situation irritated him. Suddenly restless, he looked away. He turned so that no one would notice his emotions. He did not want to show his confusion, or perhaps even displeasure. But the boy did notice. Elliot kept his eyes on his father, catching the change in his expression. There was more to his gaze than just surprise. Anastasia thought, why was her son looking at the Duke like that? Disgust appeared in his eyes, and she could not understand how Alexei deserved such a reaction. Later, when evening came, Lilia couldn't contain her joy. Her new room was simply magnificent. She couldn't believe that this was her space now. She looked at every detail with delight. The fact that she now had such a room seemed incredible to her, as if all this was not happening to her. She didn't understand what she had done to deserve so much good. It was as if fate had suddenly changed course, giving her something truly valuable. But what had she done to deserve it? It seemed to her that all this was a dream, so wonderful that it was even scary. She was afraid to believe that it was reality, because then the fear of losing everything would be stronger. She was afraid to blink, afraid that one movement would destroy her happiness, that as soon as she opened her eyes, everything would be as before. Anastasia lived in constant fear, but she never admitted it even to herself. She thought that if she didn't think about it, the fear would go away, but it was always there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the moment to make itself known again. She tried to look confident, but deep down, her anxiety never faded. However, the softness of the fabric Anastasia had left behind seemed to hold her presence within itself. This piece of soft material, the barely perceptible scent of perfume, all of this inspired a strange feeling of calm. Lily carefully touched the fabric, feeling as if Anastasia had left it there for a reason. At that moment, Lilia caught herself thinking that this place seemed to be attracting her. It seemed to be telling her, "Stay, this is where you belong." And for the first time in a long time, her heart was filled with warmth, as if she was truly expected here. Now she could allow herself to breathe deeply, without the fear that had paralyzed her for so many years. The tension inside her eased, but the knowledge that she could not change anything all this time did not allow her to completely calm down. Suddenly, a loud scream broke the silence, making Lilia jump. A woman's voice echoed down the hallway, demanding an explanation as to why this wasn't finished yet. She didn't understand what they were talking about, but there was a sense of urgency in the air. Lily froze, listening. Among the noise, she caught a name, Meg. It seemed as if the cries were addressed specifically to this girl. All the new girls here did not know how hard the work of maids was, and it seemed that no one even imagined the difficulties they had to face. Curious about what was happening, Lilia left the room to figure out the situation. Her heart was still beating fast after the unexpected noise, but curiosity overcame her fear. She had to figure out what was going on here. In the hallway, she saw an angry woman shouting at a young maid. According to her, the maid should have realized how much she was bothering others. Lilia noticed how the girl stood, with her head down, not knowing how to respond to the harsh words. The girl repeated her apologies with trembling lips, but the woman, not hiding her irritation, grabbed her by the shoulder. In a cold voice, she said that she did not need an apology because it did not change anything. Suddenly, her hand moved forward sharply, and the girl, unable to hold on, fell to the floor. Dust flew up, and an ominous silence hung in the room, broken only by the heavy breathing of those present. Lily, watching this scene, could not believe her eyes. Her heart sank with horror, and the thought flashed through her head that this should not happen. The girl, despite the pain, forced herself to speak firmly. She turned her head to the maid and sharply told her not to put on an act and to get up immediately. Lily froze. She remembered another day, another woman, but everything was the same. A cold voice, rough movements. Then in the place of this maid, there was herself, and above her stood the Baroness. The memory struck her so hard that everything inside her boiled. She couldn't help but shout that she wouldn't tolerate this anymore. Her voice cut through the tense air, and Meg turned around sharply. Lily continued to scream, demanding that the woman stop tormenting the maid. Meg raised an eyebrow, but Lilia didn't give her time to think. Her voice was shaking, but she was trying to explain that you can't treat people like that. You can't push them around and humiliate them. Lily continued to speak, trying to get her point across. She hoped that her words would awaken at least a little bit of sympathy in Meg. Gradually, her voice died down. She lowered her head, feeling the gaze on her. The head maid, unlike her, chose to remain silent. Soon she finally spoke, but not to Lilia, but to the lady, calmly but firmly. She stated that training the new maids was her responsibility. She made it clear that Lilia shouldn't interfere because it wasn't her business. There was a warning in her voice that was hard to miss. Meg watched the girl with restraint, her irritation seething inside. She couldn't stand Lily. That little rat got into things she shouldn't have. In a cold tone, she added that she hoped the lady understood everything. If Lilia continued to interfere, everything would only get more complicated. The head maid understood perfectly well that her main task was to break Lilia morally, to deprive her of confidence, to make her feel weak. She hoped that the girl realized her intentions and would not contradict her anymore. Lily looked down for a second, as if considering what was said. Then, gathering her thoughts, she slowly raised her head, but instead of answering, she just silently looked ahead, not showing her true emotions. But even in this situation, even despite the fear and pressure, Lilia understood. Wrong will remain wrong, and nothing can justify cruelty or injustice. The girl firmly believed that if someone sees injustice, they have a responsibility to intervene and try to correct the situation, even if it may lead to trouble. Anyone can correct other people's mistakes, regardless of their position. It was this thought that threw the head maid off balance. That such a brat dared to say such a thing. Lily was shaking all over. Fear was paralyzing her, but she continued to stand her ground. Although her voice was weak and her hands were shaking slightly, there was a firm confidence in her words. In the eyes of the head maid, this looked like unacceptable impudence. Some little girl decided to act like a noble aristocrat, and this made her really angry. She was angered not only by Lilia's behavior, but also by the fact that she was not as afraid of her as she should have been. In a fit of rage, the head maid declared that she understood perfectly well what the young mistress wanted to tell her. The girl, in her opinion, was trying to hint that she should continue to interfere in their affairs. This angered the maid even more because she was not going to let anyone put her in her place. Lily thought about it because she had no intention of disturbing the maid. She only wanted to explain that she shouldn't be so rude to others. But now the words were spoken, and the girl wondered if she had done the right thing. The maid, hearing her words, was surprised. She did not expect that the mistress really did not mean anything bad. However, despite this, she still thought that her actions had become a hindrance to her. Therefore, the woman emphasized that if this was really the case, then Lilia should apologize. After all, even if there were no intentions, the result was unpleasant for her, and therefore a simple apology would be appropriate. Lily was confused. It seemed strange to her that she had to ask for forgiveness since she didn't want anything bad. However, the maid's words made her think maybe an apology was really the right step. But she still did not understand what exactly she should apologize for. Then the woman said with irritation that it was not shameful for an aristocrat to apologize to an ordinary servant if she really did not want to offend her. Lilia hastened to explain that she did not consider herself superior to others and did not think that the maid was unworthy of an apology. Her words were sincere, but she felt that her interlocutor still did not fully believe her. So, Lilia firmly said that if she had really caused inconvenience, she was ready to apologize. She did not want anyone to feel bad because of her words or actions. At that moment, a boy approached them. He looked at them carefully and then addressed the maid by name, asking what she was doing. His tone was slightly wary, as if he suspected something was wrong. Judging by his expression, he had absolutely no idea what was going on here. It seemed like he had to figure out why Lilia was suddenly going to apologize to the maid. The situation seemed strange to him. The boy repeated his question insistently. He wanted a clear answer. What exactly should Lilia apologize for? It seemed to him that something was wrong here, and he was not going to just leave it like that. The nanny visibly tensed up when she saw the younger gentleman. She quickly explained that it was all just a small misunderstanding. Nothing serious had happened, and there was no reason to worry. She tried to convince him that there was nothing wrong with it. Education should take its course, but the situation had already been resolved, and there was no need to attach any unnecessary importance to it. But the boy seemed to have a different attitude. He looked at the nanny and said that was exactly why he was asking. After all, Lilia just wanted no one to hit or push anyone. Was there anything wrong with that? He was sure he was doing the right thing, and his voice, like the others, was carried in the common corridor, so she should not stray from the topic of conversation. Meg Elliott's head maid and nursemaid was watching closely, trying not to miss any important details. Because of all this, the maid began to get nervous. She was overcome with excitement. She understood that because of this little, Everett had completely lost her vigilance and did not even look around, as she was used to doing in such situations. Elliot approached. Lily looked at her carefully and asked if everything was okay. However, the girl was more concerned about the maid's condition. In her opinion, it was more important to find out how the woman was feeling rather than talk about her own condition. Meanwhile, the maid, noticing the children's uneasiness, pulled herself together and said that she was fine. She didn't want anyone to worry about her because it was just a momentary weakness that she had already overcome. Meg felt guilty and apologized. She knew she had done wrong, and she wanted to make it up to him a little. Perhaps her words had sounded harsher than they should have, but it was important to make amends now. But Elliot didn't want to listen to her excuses. He firmly stated that he didn't want to hear another word from her. For him, everything was crystal clear, and no apology could change what had happened. He thought that such an attitude towards Lily was unforgivable. It was not just rudeness, but obvious disrespect, and he could not leave it without consequences. Besides, Lily was his fiancée and therefore deserved special respect. He reminded her that being rude to Lily was the same as being rude to him. This was a non-negotiable rule, and he wanted everyone, including the maid, to understand it. Elliot also added that if Meg had nothing more to say, she should leave. He hoped that such a thing would not happen again, especially here at the door of the room. For him, the subject was closed. There was a coldness in the young master's voice, and it hurt the nanny. She felt anger boiling up inside her. His words cut to the quick because she had taken care of him for so many years, and now he was talking to her as if she were a stranger. All this time she was there looking after him, cherishing him, as if he were her own child, and she could not believe that he had changed so much. It was unthinkable to her, as if a completely different person was standing in front of her. At first, the changes in the Duchess had become a real headache for her, and now the younger gentleman was beginning to behave as if everything that had happened before did not matter. But then it hit her. Why did this make her so angry? She felt like she couldn't just accept it. And deep down, she knew that her irritation was not unfounded. She was right. Ever since this little Everett came along, it was like everyone around her had changed. People acted differently, like they were trying to please her, paying too much attention to her. It was annoying. It seemed to her that the only way out was to get rid of this little thing she was in. The way she was unnecessary. Not directly, of course, but you could put pressure on her, make her disappear without a trace. She couldn't attack the girl openly, but there were always other ways to influence the situation. Pressure, cunning. These were her main weapons. She burst into the maids' quarters, taking them by surprise. They looked at each other, not expecting to see the head maid in front of them, and were clearly nervous. One of them dared to ask why she had come to their lounge. There was nothing forbidden about it, but such a visit always promised trouble. She complained with a tired expression that she had been overloaded with work. Lady Lily had only recently arrived, but the life of a servant had only become more difficult since then. Hearing her words, the maids perked up. They themselves were unhappy with the new order, but they couldn't do anything about it. And here was such an opportunity. Meanwhile, the lady noticed that Lady Lily seemed completely unfazed by their discontent. It was as if she did not notice the changes around her. It was unfair, but what can you do? Anastasia, on the contrary, noticed the wonderful weather outside. The day turned out to be truly pleasant. She turned to Lilia, her voice calm. Why not take a walk in the garden? Nature, fresh air, a good place to escape from worries. Lily didn't even know they had a garden. It seemed like a surprising discovery, but a walk in such a place really sounded tempting. The walk with her mother was not only pleasant for Lilia, but also exciting because it meant spending time in the fresh air, surrounded by a beautiful garden. She happily agreed without hesitation. Elliot noticed that his mother and Lily were going out somewhere, and this made him wonder. He didn't know where exactly they were going, but he was curious and decided to find out. Without thinking twice, he called out loudly to Lilia, asking where they were going. He wanted to know why they were leaving and whether he should join them too. Lily turned to him and, without hiding her smile, said that she and her mother were going to take a walk in the garden. She was clearly in a good mood and was looking forward to the walk. The girl added that if he wanted, he could go with them. Her voice sounded so friendly and cheerful that it would have been simply impossible to refuse the invitation. Anastasia couldn't hide her delight. She didn't understand how the children had become so close, so quickly. Everything turned out to be as she thought. Children easily find a common language. You just have to give them a little time. Lily happily waved at Elliot, urging him to hurry up. Smiling, she told him to hurry up, and the boy, without thinking, rushed down the stairs to join them. Looking at them, Anastasia couldn't help but smile. They seemed like little yellow and black chickens scurrying around. Her heart was filled with a warm feeling. But suddenly she stopped and, looking at the children, asked if they wanted to go first without her. Her voice was calm, but there was something thoughtful in it. The children immediately became interested and asked why she wasn't going with them. Anastasia replied that she had suddenly remembered something important and wanted to pick it up first. In fact, she wanted to take a book of fairy tales with her. She had wanted to read it to the children for a long time, but she always forgot. Now it seemed to her that the moment was the most appropriate for this. Thinking about how much fun they would have listening to the stories, she imagined Lily and Elliot listening attentively, remembering every word. She wanted this story to remain in their memories. As they walked out, Elliot suddenly remembered something and walked up to Lily. He leaned over and asked her with interest if she wanted apple pie, as if he was offering her something special. Lily's eyes widened in surprise when she heard the question, but she nodded almost immediately, indicating that she certainly wanted to try. The pies from their kitchen were always delicious, but the boy decided to surprise her even more. He wanted Lilia to feel the incredible taste of apple pie. The girl thought, from behind, the boy looked just like her mother, and if he starts running as fast as she used to, he might slip and fall. The thought that something might happen to him made her nervous. She felt that she had to take care of her fiancé and worry about him. When he walked away, she turned her gaze to the garden, her attention now entirely devoted to this place. There was a beautiful garden all around, which looked especially picturesque. She had never seen anything like it before. It was truly magical. Everyone around her was so caring about her. Everyone was trying to do something nice for her. It seemed to her that every person here only wanted the best for her. This was enough for her to feel happy. The simple care from those around her filled her heart with joy. But suddenly she heard a voice. Turning around, she tried to see who was speaking and understand what was happening. They were the maids, talking quietly among themselves. They were discussing the mess in the kitchen, complaining that cookie dough was scattered everywhere. Lily immediately realized that the conversation was about her and her mother. But why? After all, they tried to work carefully, and the dough was definitely not scattered. One of the maids sighed as she said she had to clean everything. She added that even her muscles began to ache from such hard work. As if it wasn't difficult enough, and now there's even more to do. And all because of the lady, or Lily froze when she heard her name. She couldn't believe that she was being discussed in such a tone. Lily wondered if she was causing difficulties for the maids. Perhaps their work had really become more difficult with her arrival, and she just hadn't noticed. This thought frightened her, but the servants' conversation did not stop. They continued to complain that after the lady's arrival, there was more work, and now they had to serve another person. Serving the new family member was not an easy task. They had already had to work hard, but now the responsibilities had increased, and this caused discontent. They also discussed how the lady herself had changed with the arrival of the young lady. She became stricter with the servants and paid more attention to Lady Lily. If before the Duchess hardly noticed them, now she took care of Lily, but became more demanding of the servants, which also did not go unnoticed among the servants. They sympathized with the younger master and complained about the injustice. Their words alarmed Lilia, causing her to feel anxious. The servants discussed how the mistress's attention was now focused on Lily, and this could have a bad effect on the younger master. They said that the Duchess had always been cold to him, but suddenly changed and became kinder to Lilia. All this, in their opinion, happened because of her. These words made Lilia think she didn't realize how much everything had changed with her appearance, and now she felt guilty. Perhaps she really did make things more difficult for those around her. But then, one of the maids stood up for her, claiming that everyone was wrong. The girl pointed out that she had personally checked the kitchen after Mrs. and Lady Lilia's visit. There was no disorder there, and the work had not increased. Neither the cookie dough nor any other traces of cooking were a problem. Their talk of it was exaggerated. Lilia recognized in her the same girl she had once stood up for. She felt grateful for her support. The girl continued to insist that none of them could know exactly what had happened between the lady and the younger gentleman. However, everyone found the culprit too easily, hastily deciding that it was because of the young lady. No matter how much Lily thought about their words, it all seemed to her like just stupid guesses that had no solid basis. The maids who had been working in the house for a long time were quite surprised when they heard the new girl's voice. They were not used to one of the younger ones daring to speak, as if she could be their equal. Lily noticed their reaction, but did not understand what caused such a storm of emotions. They looked at each other and then burst into laughter as if they had heard something incredibly funny. One of them, curling her lips, said contemptuously that the new girl was simply a pitiful sight. She was not only inexperienced, but also stupid, ignorant, and completely unaware of how things worked here. Another added that if she can't work fast, she should at least be smart. But she constantly behaves in such a way that her elders simply can't stand her. And this is not surprising at all. Lily looked at the maid in question and noticed tension in her gaze. She clearly had not expected such a turn of events. The girl, however, quickly pulled herself together and replied that she had quite enough free time. Hearing this, the maids immediately came up with a task for her. Since she had so many free minutes, let her immediately go to the warehouse and clean there, and without anyone's help. Lily saw the girl turn pale. Apparently, she understood that she would not be able to cope with such a task. General cleaning of the warehouse is carried out only twice a year, and on this day, all the servants work there at once. But the maids just shrugged their shoulders and indifferently said that it was only her fault. She interfered too loudly in other people's conversations, got involved where she wasn't wanted, and didn't understand at all when it was better to remain silent. The newcomer still hesitated, but quickly realized that she had no choice. Since she had just arrived here, she had no choice but to obediently follow the orders of her elders. Lily did not sit back and watch what was happening, and firmly stated that she was fed up with all of this. She was not going to tolerate it any longer, knowing that it was because of her that the quarrel had broken out. She knew that this whole altercation was her fault, so she decided it would be best to end the argument before it got any worse. Lily confidently said that if someone didn't like her, then let them be angry with her. But there was no point in torturing others. She didn't want innocent people to suffer because of her. As the head maid had said, Lilia would make sure that the mistress heard everything that was happening here. This was her little revenge for the injustice. She naively believed that she was acting as an angel of justice, although in reality she was simply butting in where she shouldn't. Her interference was irritating. Lily firmly stated that the Lord must know the truth. They had not said it on purpose. She sincerely believed that in this way she could correct the situation. But suddenly, Ms. Anastasia herself intervened, clarifying that if what was said was not intentional, then it was a mistake. Her tone did not bode well. Those who were talking froze in fear. They turned around and saw the lady who was looking at them intently, noting how surprising it was to hear such conversations. As always, once she was out of sight, the discussions became much more interesting. But now they were caught off guard, and everyone felt extremely awkward. Their fear was so great that they seemed to be petrified, not knowing what to say or do. No one expected the lady to be there at such a moment. Anastasia noted with a slight smile that she seemed to have once again interrupted their enjoyment of the conversation. Then she emphasized that no one was stopping them from continuing the conversation. The maids were very frightened and could not understand why their mistress decided to come at this moment. They knew that they had done something wrong, but they did not expect that it would attract her attention now. Their hearts froze in fear when they saw her enter, looking at them with a stern look. They didn't understand what exactly she said. It seemed that fear had muffled their hearing, or they simply didn't dare to perceive her words correctly. They looked at each other in confusion, as if hoping that one of them would figure out what exactly the mistress wanted. Anastasia, noticing their confusion, only calmly noted that they should continue their work. Braiding her long hair, she added that she did not intend to waste her time on their bewilderment. Work, that was what they should be doing. The maids were trembling with fear and did not know how to respond correctly. They did not dare to look up, afraid to see cold condemnation in her eyes. Any careless word could only worsen their situation. After a few minutes of silence, Anastasia asked why they were silent. Her voice was even, but there was a hidden severity in it. She was waiting for an answer, and her patience was gradually running out. The maids finally dared to speak, faltering and making excuses. They tried to explain that they had recently spoken with Lilia and agreed that there was more work. However, their voices trembled, revealing uncertainty in their words. Anastasia listened to them attentively, but none of their excuses seemed convincing to her. She noted that since they were aware of the increased workload, they had nothing to complain about. Their fear only confirmed that what they had said earlier was a lie. Then she noticed that they were even discussing Elliot's thoughts. She wondered why they were suddenly drawing conclusions about what he was saying or thinking. Such conversations were not part of their job description. One maid in particular stood out, that same blonde. Just recently, she had told the new girl that it was her own fault since she couldn't understand the situation. Now Anastasia saw that this maid herself was completely unable to assess what was happening. Her intervention seemed inappropriate. It became obvious to the lady that this girl was constantly butting in where it wasn't her business. She concluded that next time she should take a closer look at her behavior. The maid immediately began to apologize, almost losing her composure from fear. Anastasia thought, after all, this girl has been working in the estate for a long time. Perhaps it is worth reconsidering her place among the servants if she does not know how to behave properly. Anastasia really thought about firing the maid, but she knew that if she fired her, Lilia's reaction to it could become even more negative. So she decided to pull herself together and show restraint so as not to make the situation worse. Mrs. Anastasia said that the maids should apologize, to which they, looking at each other in surprise, asked in chorus what she was talking about and what was required of them. Anastasia repeated that they should apologize not only to Lilia, but also to the new maid whom they had recently bullied without thinking about the consequences. She added that these apologies must be sincere so that she could see how much they realized their guilt and how seriously they take it. The maids, stunned by the mistress's words, immediately felt a strong fear. They did not expect that the situation could escalate so much. They hastened to apologize to the lady, and of course she accepted their apology. After that, they also asked for forgiveness from Jane, realizing that it was they who were to blame. Anastasia smiled, her face softened slightly, and she said that it was the right decision, but her gaze was such that the maids could not understand what she was really thinking. At the end, the lady reminded them that this was the second time something like this had happened, and that they had to remember this lesson. Otherwise, the consequences would be much more serious next time. This is the second time that Anastasia has noticed how rudely Lilia is being treated. She cannot understand why this happens so often, and why it does not stop. The maids were amazed when they learned that Anastasia kept such account. It was news to them because rarely did anyone in the family care about such trifles. She stated that if there was a third time, they would all face the consequences. Her words were firm, and she had no doubt that it was the right thing to do. This time it ended with just a reprimand, but everyone knew that this was the last time the situation would go without serious consequences. This time, they understood for sure that this was unacceptable. After the incident, the lady asked everyone to leave. She added that Jane would no longer be cleaning the warehouse, noting this with cold determination. When everyone left, Anastasia remained in silence. She was silent, thinking about what had happened, and her gaze was focused on the thoughts that did not give her peace. If you think about it, the whole situation was too suspicious. Anastasia couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it than just a random incident. They couldn't bully Lilia openly, so they started using more covert methods of pressure. It was too subtle to notice, but Anastasia felt it. However, she became curious. Was it really their own initiative, or was there someone else behind it whose interests were hidden from her eyes? The questions were becoming more and more complicated. She couldn't help but wonder if there was something much more complex and dangerous behind this than she had assumed. She turned to Lilia and immediately realized that the girl was very absorbed in what was happening. Liliana was completely immersed in her thoughts and feelings, not noticing anything around her. Anastasia asked how she was feeling. Lilia answered reservedly that everything was fine, but her eyes betrayed the anxiety she could not hide. Anastasia did not understand how they could mock such a little girl. A desire to protect her flared up in her heart, and she was ready to act decisively. Lily couldn't understand what was happening to her mother. Somehow, she was completely out of her mind. Everything around her seemed strange, and the girl felt that something was wrong. After all, Anastasia turned to her daughter and asked where Elliot was. Lilia, without thinking, answered that he had gone to get an apple pie for her to please his mother. Anastasia realized that Elliot had left her alone. But if it hadn't been for her own decision, none of this might have happened. She felt that she might have been wrong, but deep down, she knew that he couldn't be blamed. Everything that happened was the maid's fault, their carelessness and oversight. They hadn't taken important things into account, and that had played a role. Elliot returned soon, after thinking that Lilia was bored. He, of course, could not know what was really going on. and was sure that everything would be fine after his return. He was surprised to see Lilia with such eyes. Approaching the girl, he asked what was wrong. Noticing how red her eyes were, he didn't like that. Something was wrong. Lily smiled and assured that she was fine. Although her face was flushed, she tried to hide her worries, but the internal tension was still visible. Anastasia watched the girl with warmth, her heart filled with pride. Little Lily was so resilient, despite everything that was happening around her. It was noticeable. Elliot brought milk and grapes, trying to maintain an atmosphere of calm. He wanted everyone to feel better, hoping that small gestures would help calm the situation. Anastasia noted that Elliot had done well bringing snacks. She always believed that a true gentleman would never leave a lady alone, especially at such moments. However, she understood that he should have ordered food to be served, or at least offered it, along with Lilia. The girl had only just arrived, and he should have taken that into account. The boy said that he understood her perfectly, and it was sincere. He wanted to show that he supported her in what she was going through. These were not just words, but real sympathy. Elliot was truly kind and funny, as befits the son of such a mother. His sincerity and simplicity were always on the surface, and Anastasia could not help but be proud of him. She told Elliot to be attentive, because his mother would always teach him only good things. She wanted him to be smart and correct in his actions, because that was important. She was in complete shock and could not understand how the Duke appeared. This event was so unexpected and strange that Anastasia could not believe her eyes. Alexei, however, did not understand at all what surprised her so much. He simply could not comprehend what was happening, considering that it was something ordinary, and there was nothing surprising about it. She was struck by his beauty. She could hardly contain her emotions. It was not just attractiveness, but something supernatural that made her heart beat faster. He was so handsome that Anastasia couldn't understand how his wife could cope with it. The lady only greeted him, but her gaze couldn't tear itself away from his face. It was too perfect. The Duke, however, did not quite understand why Anastasia was so shocked. He said that her words were correct and he should be more careful in his actions, especially in relation to. The Duke noticed that he used the moralizing as an excuse to get closer to Anastasia. She continued to surprise him with her answers and behavior, which aroused his interest. What Anastasia said to the maids was the perfect answer to the Duchess, who said they would not have a third chance. Everything was decided, and Anastasia knew it. He was shocked when Anastasia suggested that they all read a fairy tale. It seemed so unexpected and exciting that he found it hard to believe in its ease and sincerity. Every time he saw a new image of her, his gaze could not tear itself away from her. She was like something completely new and exciting, and his interest in her only increased. He couldn't hide his smile when he saw her. No matter what was going on around him, her presence always brought peace and warmth to his heart. He knew that his wife was a truly amazing person. Behind her outward reserve, there was a deep kindness, and he often admired her inner world. When she began to read to children, her voice became special. It was not just reading. She transported them into the world of a fairy tale, and they listened with bated breath. Elliot and Lilia always listened attentively to her stories. The children were enchanted by her style of reading, and Anastasia seemed to be able to give each of them a special world. Today she read a story about chickens, and the children, despite its sad ending, believed that they could be saved. With every word their hope grew stronger. At one point, Elliot turned to his father and suggested that he read something. His suggestion sounded unexpected and a little funny, as if he was playing a game. Alexei asked again. In surprise, he couldn't believe that his son had decided to turn to him. Elliot confirmed, and they both realized that something interesting was about to happen. Alexei didn't know what to do. His eyes became helpless for a moment, like a little puppy's, but then he decided that he had to try at least a little. After a pause, he finally agreed and began to read. Despite his doubts, he understood that this was a chance to get a little closer to the children, even if reading was not his strong point. But it was immediately clear that Alexei couldn't read like she could. He tried to be serious, but his expression only increased the tension in the room. The children sensed it immediately, and although they were used to her soft and lively reading, what happened now was foreign to them. They felt not entirely comfortable. Anastasia, watching this, could hardly contain her laughter. He tried, but this was clearly not his element, and she could not help but notice how artificially he did all this. He read with such intensity that it became monotonous and difficult. His tiredness was heard in every word, and the children immediately felt it. Elliot, noticing how hard their father was reading, quietly said that he had had enough. He did not want to listen any more. He did not like this new style. He added regretfully that it would have been better if his mother had taken up the story again, because his father's reading had turned out to be a real mistake for the evening. Anastasia smiled, saying that she would definitely read them a fairy tale. There was warmth in her voice, and her eyes reflected a slight joy at this idea. She always believed that the Duke was good at everything he did. His ability to cope with any task inspired her. She trusted him completely. However, despite all her confidence, she felt a little awkward. She apologized, saying that perhaps this was not the moment for laughter, but she still couldn't help it. The Duke didn't answer. He seemed irritated, and Anastasia immediately realized that she might have gone too far with the joke. The silence stretched out, as if the air was growing thicker. The Duke sighed and covered his face with his hand. He was clearly unhappy, and this made Anastasia feel even more awkward. She didn't know how to put everything back in its place. She knew his irritation was genuine, and immediately decided to try to do something to fix the situation. But she didn't know how to approach him. Anastasia turned to the Duke with a request, but he replied that nothing of the sort had happened. His voice was even, but there was still a shadow of discontent in his eyes. After that, he simply looked at her, and Anastasia felt a slight smile on her face again. She tried to bring lightness back into the atmosphere, but the internal tension remained. He said he had to get back to business. The documents had been waiting a long time. There was no anger in his tone, but there was no warmth either, just dry business politeness. She had long since gotten used to the fact that he rarely showed his emotions, but this time something was wrong. It was as if he had moved away from her, and she felt strange in how she perceived him. He didn't understand why she was so beautiful. It confused him, and so he started to walk away, feeling his face turn red. He couldn't explain this feeling. He didn't know what was happening to his heart. And the lady saw him like this for the first time. Perhaps it was all because he was so upset by the badly read fairy tale. Since then, she began to think that she needed to be more careful, especially with things that could lead to such difficult situations. She tried to avoid unnecessary worries. His heart could not calm down, and the Duke walked around the palace all red, as if he did not know how to cope with this new feeling that had taken hold of him so strongly. He was no longer a 13-year-old child, and now it seemed stupid to him not to understand what was happening to him. This behavior was increasingly confusing to him. He decided that he needed to distract himself with work so as not to think about it. He hoped that through physical exercise, his thoughts would calm down a little and come into order. On the way, he unexpectedly met Meg and was surprised to see her. He did not expect to meet her in such a place, and this moment made him think. The maid was also glad to see him. She said that she had an important message that she wanted to give him. This interested him, and he became more attentive. He wondered what the butler had said about some rumors that concerned the servants. What he had heard turned out to be true, and now he had to figure it out. The Duke was surprised because Meg never spoke of such things. Usually, she always insisted that Mrs. Lily was feeling well and that nothing was bothering her. He found Meg unpleasant, and he didn't know whether he could trust her. She said that if there was something important, it would be better to tell the butler, who would pass the information on to him. The maid asked him to stop because she needed to talk about his son. This made him freeze, and he waited with interest to see what she would say. The Duke, a little surprised, stopped and told her to tell him he was ready to listen to what she was going to tell him. The Duke turned sharply when he heard her say that something had happened to Elliot. The words immediately caught his attention, and he felt uneasy waiting for an explanation. The woman nodded, confirming that it was true, and began to tell what had happened to Elliot. Her face remained serious, and her voice was calm, but there was a note of alarm in it. However, after a moment, she noticed that it had been a long time since she had spoken to the Duke, as she did now under these circumstances. This caused her cheeks to flush, and she fell silent. The Duke didn't understand what she meant. He was confused by her words and didn't know what was going on at the moment, as if he didn't know how to react to her behavior. She finally explained that these memories brought back to her the old days when he was a younger Duke, and she was by his side, caring for him, like a caring and devoted woman. At such moments she always wanted to return to those happy times. But blushing, she quickly returned to the matter at hand, reminding herself that she had to speak to the point. The Duke, after listening to her, suddenly noticed that she had just said that she had news about his son. This immediately attracted his attention, and he braced himself for important information. He insisted that she speak clearly, briefly, and without unnecessary details. He was ready to listen, but only to the important facts, without wasting time on unnecessary talk. The maid was slightly startled by his stern tone, but nodded. She said that she understood everything, and added that this concerned the Duchess herself, not only Elliot. She noticed that the Duchess often took care of the ladies, but sometimes forgot to pay attention to the younger gentlemen. This worried the maid, and she was worried that it might affect Elliot. The woman finished her words by adding that the Duchess sometimes becomes overly caring and forgets about other duties, including attention to the younger gentlemen. The maid noticed that the talk about favorites seemed to be going on. She remembered one of the maids talking about it a few days ago and wondered where it all came from. He wondered who could be the source of these conversations. After some thought, he realized that it was the head maid who usually had such conversations. The girl realized that she was in big trouble now. If he found out that she was behind these rumors, she knew that it could end very badly for her. The woman immediately fell to her knees in front of him, begging for forgiveness. She explained that she was not at all to blame, and that it was a very delicate matter that she had decided to discuss with him alone. She said she shared this because she genuinely cares about him and wants to help him understand the situation, even if it seems like meddling in other people's affairs. But according to her, she did not spread rumors, but on the contrary, she believed that it was necessary to pay attention to the opinions of other maids. After all, it is important to understand what they think about what is happening. She was sure that her opinion mattered and should be taken into account, especially if the other maids also shared her point of view about how the mistress treated the younger master. The Duke remarked that she should know her limits in such matters. He pointed out that the maids were already beginning to treat Lilia too arrogantly, and the only thing that could be done was to pay more attention to her. He noted that if she had trained the maids properly, none of this would have happened. He did not realize that her words were a real insult to his wife, and she needed to be aware of that. The maid was shocked, and the Duke calmly explained that if a servant is dissatisfied with her mistress, she is obliged to directly report it, even if it is not easy. However, she came to the Duke, declaring that he was not allowed to do so. She openly accused her mistress, claiming that he should explain her behavior to her. He remarked that she would now have to take proper care of everything, and that she had better understand that he did not intend to continue talking to her on such a subject any longer. So he forbade her to come to him directly. If she had something to say, she was to convey it through the butler and not to interfere with such statements. This made her extremely angry. She considered such measures to be absolutely unacceptable, and she was not going to put up with it so easily. She had known the Duke since childhood, and he, in her opinion, had no right to treat her like that. He could not do that with her respect, since they had been friends for a long time. The changes in this woman's behavior were becoming more and more obvious and problematic for her. She could not understand how everything had changed so quickly, and what to do about this situation now. Previously, as the head maid, she could influence many things. But now everything changed because the mistress was no longer interested in the household, and her role was no longer so important. She realized with surprise that she was simply lucky to become the mistress of Valois, but she herself was of low birth, from the family of a marquis. At first, she threw off all the duties of a mistress, but now she pretended to be a duchess. This made the head maid very angry. She thought that all this was unfair and that it was impossible for the situation to develop like this. Her anger melted inside her. She knew she could never become the Duke's wife, and for that reason, she decided to work on his estate, occasionally running into him, hoping that something would change. Anastasia felt how she gradually became a real mistress, managing all the maids, which brought her special pleasure. At that moment, she felt power. It was the only thing she could control at the moment, and to take even that little joy away from her would be cruel. After all, the Duchess was not a good person. It was hard to resist her now, but Anastasia wasn't going to just give in. She wasn't ready to go with the flow and let things go their way. Anastasia wanted to analyze everything and figure it out, but since everything had gone this way, there was no point in wasting time. It was necessary to act because there was no choice left. She approached the maid and asked her to convey an important message to everyone else that needed to be carried out as quickly as possible. Everything was set for an important moment. All the maids were to immediately gather in the break room. Anastasia was waiting for them there, where she could begin to solve problems related to her future plans. Everett had become a source of irritation for her. Anastasia knew she needed to find a way to deal with this annoying girl and put an end to all this. That day, despite all the fuss and stress, Anastasia suddenly felt that the day had been successful. This feeling was new and slightly calming. She watched how happy they looked with the children, and also how the Duke revealed a different side, showing qualities she had not noticed before. The smile froze on her face. There was something tender about it, something she hadn't seen before, but now she realized the Duke wasn't as unapproachable as he seemed. But it was better to forget about these thoughts. For a while, Anastasia was tired. She needed to sleep. She decided that it was better to rest, so that tomorrow she would be able to solve everything. As soon as she settled into bed, under a warm blanket, Anastasia felt a huge sense of relief. But suddenly someone knocked on the door, disturbing her peace. Anastasia couldn't understand what could have happened at such a late hour. Who could have come to their house, and what led to this? Her brain was working at full capacity, but the answers still didn't come. She heard someone knocking on the door, and the maid who stood at the threshold immediately explained that she apologized for the late visit. She was worried that her mistress would not approve of her arrival. When Anastasia looked at the maid, she immediately realized that this was the same girl she had seen in the garden. There was no doubt. It was definitely her. The maid immediately confirmed her words, and Anastasia noticed that she had come for the very reason that she herself was going to talk to her about. Everything coincided, and it was strange. Jane was a little taken aback by her mistress's call. She felt that her gratitude for her openness and help to the other maids had been in the air for a long time, but she had not expected this turn of events. The maid was glad that her work was appreciated, but she emphasized that it was simply her duty. She was still grateful for the words of appreciation, which always sound pleasant. Anastasia couldn't help but ask, what brought her here at such a late hour? Her intuition told her that it was no accident, and she wanted to know more. The maid hesitated, but admitted that the situation was difficult. However, Anastasia, smiling softly, said that everything would be fine and she could tell everything as it was. Anastasia understood that if the maid had come at such a late hour, it meant that it was really important. She was ready to listen without rushing and without being distracted by extraneous thoughts. The next morning, Elliot was surprised. It was the first time his mistress had called him so early, and it made him feel uneasy. He didn't know what was waiting for him, but he already felt the tension inside. The butler reported that Elliot had already arrived, and immediately added that the lady had asked him to leave them alone. This added even more mystery to the whole situation. Anastasia apologized for calling him so early and explained that she couldn't wait any longer. Elliot sensed that something important was brewing, and his eyes reflected a slight worry. Anastasia smiled quietly, and the butler could not help but notice how she had changed. He was very surprised. The lady never showed her feelings, especially at such moments. He said there was nothing wrong with her calling him so early, but there was still some uncertainty in her voice. He thought maybe she had another motive. But before she continued, she asked him not to stand, but to sit down immediately. Her voice was calm, but there was a gentle insistence in it, as if she knew what would make him most comfortable. He, a little puzzled, did not understand her request, because he was quite comfortable standing. However, she specified that she was uncomfortable, and therefore he had to sit down. This was strange. He couldn't help but notice that her demeanor was more affectionate than usual. There was something unusual in the way she spoke to him, as if she had something important to tell him. She even said she would get straight to the point. The reason she called him was to start looking after the head maid. It sounded unexpected. The butler was somewhat surprised, and without hiding his doubts, asked if he was really assigned to watch the head maid. He felt a strange tension in the air, but could not understand the reason. The lady confirmed his words, and then the Duke's words came to his mind. He had to secretly find out information about the head maid, the Baroness, and her husband, the Baron. It was all connected. This coincided with Gert's order. Perhaps the lady had the same suspicions as the Duke, and now she decided to use him to test her guesses. Or maybe she was just trying to set up a maid she didn't like. There were too many intrigues in this house, and not all of them seemed clear to him. He felt that something was wrong. Given the lady's behavior so far, he was probably leaning toward the second option, but he couldn't be sure. In such situations, one always had to be careful and not rush to conclusions. But when the lady noticed that he was lost in thought, she asked him what he was thinking about so intensely. His thoughts became obvious, and she clearly expected a frank answer from him. He wanted to ask her what she really thought too, but instead she just said it didn't matter and showed her indifference. He couldn't understand her. He couldn't stop tormenting himself with the question of what was behind her words, what she really meant when she gave him such an order so calmly and decisively, as if none of this mattered. He couldn't understand it, no matter how hard he tried. And even if it irritated her, he still decided to ask permission to do what his intuition told him. But it was risky. He was in a hopeless situation. He had no choice but to just sit and hope that he would not get into trouble. His thoughts were confused, but he could not understand how this would all end. The lady was somewhat surprised by his request, and the butler tried to explain that he did not want to offend her or do anything wrong. All he wanted was to avoid misunderstandings. He didn't want to be part of this cruel circle. He didn't want to take part in the cruel games that were going on in this house. He didn't think it was his role to be part of this bullying. Everything that was happening around him was the result of his duties. He had to keep order in this mansion. Although he understood that he often found himself in difficult situations that prevented him from doing his job, he noted to himself that he could not initiate such actions because it was contrary to his principles. It was difficult for him to hide his fear when he said this, but he still expressed his position. Maybe he should be prepared for the possibility that she might do something like throw a cup. He knew the reaction could be unpredictable, but at some point he began to doubt whether he should have said it at all. He had created a difficult situation for himself, as if he had dug his own grave. The lady, having listened to him, only smiled, but her look showed that she was somewhat surprised by such a statement on his part. She turned to him with a question, clearly wanting to understand his words, and asked if this should be taken as a rejection on his part. Her question was direct, but there was a certain softness in it. He was genuinely surprised by her calm reaction, and asked her again, not understanding how she could react so calmly. He did not expect her to accept his words with such composure. He noticed that he was not able to refuse directly, and admitted that he was nervous. The lady, however, remained calm, noting that she understood everything, and all the reasons he explained were clear to her. Besides, he was the only one who decided to openly warn his mistress. Despite all the possible consequences, his words were devoid of any intention to harm, but he was still worried. She did not allow herself to get involved in conflict situations, especially in this place, and therefore she thought very carefully about every word she said, so as not to create unnecessary tension that could lead to unpleasant consequences. That was why she rejected even the thought that he might try to test her patience with such harsh words. Her look and behavior showed that she took it all calmly. She calmly asked if he was sure of his words, but her reaction showed neither indignation nor anger. She understood everything and did not even know how to react to his conclusions, but tried not to give in to emotions. In response, he once again confirmed that everything was fine, and his words were indeed correct. The lady, in turn, also remained confident in her reaction, because she always tried to understand the correctness of the situation. She ordered him to stay put, reminding him that a butler should keep order in the house, prevent disorder, so that nothing would disturb the peace. However, was everything appropriate for such an attitude on her part? At some point, he felt anxious, realizing his mistake. Confusion overwhelmed him when he realized that he had done something unacceptable. He was afraid that his behavior had led to tension. He noticed a smile appear on her face and immediately understood. Her attitude had changed. The lady had become different, not like before. Everything around her somehow became clearer, and he understood her changes. Lily approached her mother and quietly said that she had come to eat, asking not to keep her with breakfast. She hoped that her mother would not mind that she had to intervene in the middle of the conversation. At first, she thought of sitting down at the table, but she noticed that her mother was already busy talking and decided that it would be better not to disturb. Lily stood a little to the side, not wanting to be the cause of any inconvenience. The lady smiled, assuring that her presence was not a disturbance. They had already finished their conversation, so Lilia could sit down calmly without feeling guilty for her interference. She explained with a gentle smile that the butler had only chatted with her for a bit, but it didn't matter. Her eyes were friendly, and she seemed comfortable in the situation. The butler confirmed her words, and the lady, feeling that the moment had come, asked Lilia to go on with her business, since she herself also had to make room for other matters. Lily was happy and hoped that her mother would allow her to give her a little surprise. She felt a wave of joy and anticipation that her gift would be received with gratitude. The lady accepted the offer with pleasure, saying that she always loved surprises. It was obvious how much she enjoyed such moments, and she was sincerely happy with the gift that Lilia decided to give her. She had really changed. Now she was no longer the strict and domineering duchess who could yell at someone for little things. This woman had become softer, calmer, and kinder than ever before. The lady apparently was a different person. She changed in the best sense of the word, and these changes were noticed by everyone. She became much more open, calm, and ready for dialogue. Despite everything that was happening, the butler still asked to explain the reason for such an unusual request of the lady. He could not understand what was behind such a decision, and his curiosity did not give him peace. She was silent at first, as if lost in thought, but soon answered him with a light sigh. The lightning-fast feeling of self-pity was reflected in her answers when she finally decided to share her story. She said she didn't see the point in telling him at all. The answer seemed unimportant to her because she already knew how he would react, even if she explained. The butler was confused, and she noticed that even if she told him all her reasons, he still would not believe her. His attitude towards her was too suspicious. He was still scared. She calmly added that she did not blame him for not trusting her, and certainly did not intend to punish him. It was not her style, and she would not stoop to such measures. She could understand his behavior if she looked back at her actions in the past. Yes, she was not the best example of trust, but that does not mean that all her actions should be perceived as such. However, it was no longer possible for her to endure this. This attitude irritated her, and she decided that she was not going to endure it any longer. She did not want to face this anymore. The butler was getting more and more nervous. She, in turn, noted that she had not asked him to interfere in the maid's affairs or to arrange some kind of persecution for her, as he had thought when she had spoken only of observation. He immediately decided that she wanted something bad for the maid, without even bothering to understand her words. He acted on his fears and preconceived notions, not noticing the essence of the request. He didn't even try to soberly evaluate her words, but immediately began to object. This made her wary, and she wanted to know why he reacted so sharply to her request, what he didn't like. All she wanted was to simply express her request. It was nothing unusual or sinister, but his reaction was completely different, and it baffled her. The butler was becoming increasingly frightened, and she decided that it was time to be straightforward. She would speak to him openly and directly, so that there would be no more misunderstandings between them. The butler must stop judging Anastasia based on the established stereotypes that were imposed on him earlier. His views must change. Otherwise, he will not be able to properly perform his duties. His job is to judge the situation solely in the context of the orders she gives. She wants him to express his opinions honestly, without bias, without relying on past assessments. Anastasia reminded him that this was his job, and that she expected him to take an impartial view of what was happening. Her eyes seemed to penetrate the butler's very soul, demanding sincerity. Approaching the table, she addressed him again, but his excuses, although barely audible, did not impress her. Anastasia did not need words. She wanted actions, which was more important. Meg, meanwhile, had chosen a pendant for herself and felt that it would be sufficient for her purposes. She had no doubt that with this decoration, she would be able to achieve the desired result. If all went well, her troubles could be over very quickly. Success depended on how she used this decoration, and if all went according to plan, her goals would be achieved. She smiled slightly, imagining little Everett being banished from the palace. All she had to do was manipulate the situation correctly to rid herself of the problem. "It's an expensive item, my lady," she reminded him with a hint of caution in her voice. If it were to go missing, no one would be able to help but notice, and the consequences would be unpredictable. Meg knew that if she somehow framed Everett, the latter would be banished. All these actions were supposed to lead to an inevitable result that suited everyone. The head maid believed that there were only a few steps left to complete her plan. She had already discussed all the details with the maid, and all that was left was to throw the pendant into Everett's room to complete the game. Meg thought it would be easy, and everything would be sorted out quickly. However, despite her confidence, she kept putting it off and could not find the strength to take action. At that moment, when she was standing in the corridor, a boy approached her. He looked calm, but there was something strange in his eyes that made her wary and immediately feel slightly uneasy. When she saw him, she felt a little scared. The young gentleman stood in front of her, and she immediately asked him what his purpose was. There was a slight tension in her voice, and her gaze was wary. The boy, in turn, looked curious and interested. He asked a strange question, wondering what the head maid was doing with his mother's feet, causing her even more confusion. Meg felt her heart skip a beat. She began to worry, thinking that maybe he had seen everything and now knew more than he should. Panic overtook her, and she couldn't immediately think of a response. However, for a moment she came to the conclusion that if he had really seen everything, he would have behaved differently. He sat in front of her, calm and questioning, which meant that he did not understand the whole situation. And this gave her a chance. Meg began to explain that she was just tidying up the room a little, but she knew that the boy probably knew that she wasn't doing that and wasn't there out of habit. She tried to justify herself by explaining that she had come in to check and, seeing the mess, had decided to clean up. But those words apparently didn't sound convincing enough, and she knew it wouldn't work. Not knowing how else to get out of the situation, Meg realized that she had no choice but to resort to extreme measures. She quickly came to the decision that everything would depend on her actions now. In despair, she fell to her knees and began to say that she had no choice. All she could do was take all the blame on herself, because if the cleaning was not done properly, she would be held responsible. Meg began to cry, her voice filled with worry. She was worried that if the truth about her actions came out, it would all be on her conscience. And this did not give her peace, because the consequences could be very serious. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and she said that if God knew about this, she would definitely be angry. Fearing the consequences, she could not remain calm, feeling her anxiety growing. The boy looking at her did not understand why she was so worried and crying. He said that maybe it was not that serious and that she should not worry. He just did not need to tell his mother that she cleaned again. Meg calmed down a little and looked at the boy with gratitude. She confirmed that he was right and said that she appreciated his help, but deep down, she felt that she had no one else but him. She did it because she knew it would work. He was just a kid, and she had been his nanny for years. He trusted her, he didn't doubt her, and that worked in her favor. She said that she would never forget his kindness, promising to keep the memory of this moment. The lady, however, did not say another word, and quietly looked out the window, watching the garden. She watched the children play carefree in the garden. It was a peaceful moment, and there was something pure in their eyes, as if they were heavenly creatures. Sitting there, she felt that this moment reminded her of heaven. She often admired them, always experiencing tender feelings when she saw them playing and laughing. At that moment, the butler knocked on the door and reminded her of his presence. The lady, without taking her eyes off the window, calmly allowed him to enter. The butler said that there was something important he had to tell her. The lady, not surprised, replied that he should speak at once without delaying the important news. She thought there was only one reason he had decided to approach her. It was something important, because she knew that such things were discussed when children were not around, and that could only be serious. He began to talk about the head maid and her behavior. He was clearly worried, but she already guessed what he was talking about, and indeed he confirmed her suspicions. He said that as she asked, he was watching the head maid. He had never paid attention before, but now he realized how scary and dangerous this person could be. Anastasia was determined to tell her husband what had happened that morning, but she felt it would not be easy. The information she was about to pass on could turn everything in their home upside down. She listened to the details, but she could not understand what had prompted the head maid to do such a thing. It seemed out of place, and the explanation was too simple: hunger and pain. Despite everything that had happened, Anastasia was still the head of the family, and her reputation remained important. This meant that the maid had a hard time justifying her actions. Everything could be called into question. Anastasia understood that she had to act carefully. Everything that was happening had to be carefully planned, so she decided not to rush and not to take too abrupt steps. Soon she noticed a maid, who was clearly on the side of the head maid. This left Anastasia with no choice. She had to figure out what was happening to the end without missing a single detail. She suggested changing clothes and invited the children to follow her. It was important that everything happened under her control. In this house, no one could act without her knowledge. Anastasia decided that it was necessary to check everything thoroughly. The initiator of this conflict could hardly hide his tracks. She knew that the truth would be revealed sooner or later. Under her leadership, most of the maids remained loyal, but there were those among them who had doubts. This put her in a vulnerable position. Every step had to be thought out. Those who were on her side clearly left no doubt. But this required caution, because even the closest could end up on the enemy's side. In such moments, you always need to be on guard. At that moment, Lilia approached her with a bouquet of flowers. She looked genuinely pleased when she said that they were for Anastasia. This gesture touched her mother's heart, and she could not hide her joy. Anastasia accepted the flowers with gratitude and promised that she would definitely put them in the best place. She was glad that her daughter cared about her so much and did not leave her in difficult moments. Lily noticed that her mother had changed her clothes and asked why she had done so. Anastasia did not want to explain that her mood was no better, but at that moment she decided that changing her clothes would make her mood lighter. In fact, Anastasia had another intention. First of all, she had to change her clothes so as not to show her excitement. It was all connected with the fact that she managed to find out from the maids about the incident with the head maid. She chose an object that was so obvious that it seemed downright absurd. At first glance, the choice was too obvious, almost ridiculous, but there was something hidden in it. It was quite brave of her. One of the maids had passed on the message that there was something wrong with the box, and they were having problems. The news had come unexpectedly, and the situation had suddenly become important. At that moment, the lady immediately realized that something had happened. Possible reasons quickly began to line up in her head, and her gaze became determined. She was ready to figure it out, but she did not expect this. The maid looked at her expectantly, but Anastasia decided that there was nothing to worry about. She understood that this whole situation was nothing more than a small misunderstanding. However, the maid was clearly worried. As soon as Anastasia said her words, she noticed the disappointment on the maid's face. It was so obvious that her expression became almost offensive. Her displeasure was visible to the naked eye. The lady couldn't understand how it was possible to have such a strong impact on an adult. Why was everyone reacting so alarmed? Why was it such a big deal when nothing serious was really happening? How could adults, who usually have so many worries and problems, interfere so actively in the life of a small child? It was strange and inappropriate. There was no rational explanation for such behavior. It would be understandable if it was simple maids, but the head maid was behaving completely unpredictably. This added even more headache. Anastasia could not understand why she was behaving so strangely. After all, this woman had nothing to do with Elliot for a long time. How could she treat him like that? There was no logic to her behavior, only strange mood swings and an uncontrollable hostility. Anastasia couldn't even imagine how much this could hurt a child. Everything that was happening was strange and unpleasant for her, and she didn't understand how such trifles could affect Elliot so much. When he learned that the nanny he trusted his entire life, and who had been with him since childhood, had acted so vilely, it struck him to the depths of his soul. He could not understand how this was possible. Anastasia couldn't believe what was happening. She didn't understand how it happened. Suddenly, the boy started calling her, which seemed to betray some kind of anxiety in his voice, but she couldn't figure out the reason for it. At first, he thought that something had happened to the lady, and she had become angry, but he could not imagine that something so serious had happened that made her be so cold and strict. When the lady heard his questions, she was surprised and said that nothing terrible had happened. She had just been thinking a little absorbed in her thoughts, and it might have looked strange. Without realizing it, Anastasia felt her irritation growing. Meanwhile, Lily came up and quietly said that she had put new flowers in the vase and hoped that they would cheer her up. Lily expressed her wish that the lady would look at these flowers and feel relief. She hoped that this would help her to relax a little and get rid of the tension that was on her face. The lady was deeply touched. She smiled and felt tears start to flow from her eyes. She didn't expect that such small gestures could touch her so much. Anastasia apologized to the children, saying that she did not want to disturb them. She thanked them for their concern and promised that everything would be fine, despite all the difficulties they had experienced. She tried to calm them down, assuring them that everything would be fine. There was tension in her voice, but she kept her emotions in check. She promised that she would cope, despite the complexity of the situation. Anastasia said there was no need to worry. She assured the children that she would sort everything out herself and take responsibility for what was happening. She didn't want anyone else to worry about her. At this time, the maid returned, smiling happily at the sight of her mistress, in a good mood. She was glad that everything was all right and felt relieved to see that the situation had finally stabilized. It was the same maid who had been expecting an answer from her mistress a few days ago, but had been disappointed when she had not received one. She decided that now that everything had calmed down, she needed to talk to her mistress. She approached the maid and informed her that the necklace that the mistress loved and cherished so much had disappeared. This was a real shock for her, but the mistress had long ago decided that she would deal with this issue herself and sort out the situation. Anastasia felt anxiety growing inside her. It had begun. She didn't know what to prepare for, but she felt that something was wrong. To clarify the situation, she asked the maid what had happened to her necklace. The maid, after a slight hesitation, replied that she did not know the details. She could only offer to take the mistress to the head maid. According to her, she knew more and could explain everything. Lilia was surprised to see them being led towards her room. She hadn't expected that the situation could be related to her. Her heart started beating faster. A premonition of something unpleasant did not leave her. The girl began to get nervous. There was something about all this that she didn't like. She couldn't understand why she would suddenly be accused of something, but her anxiety grew. The head maid greeted the mistress with obvious relief. She looked as if she had been waiting for her to appear for a long time. Her eyes showed confidence in her own rightness, which only increased the tension. Anastasia was not going to tolerate omissions. She firmly stated that she was waiting for an explanation. What had happened and why was there such a fuss around her necklace? She did not tolerate confusion and demanded clarity. The maid reported that the necklace that was so precious to the mistress had been found in Lady Lilia's room that day. This was an obvious fact that put the girl at a great disadvantage. She even presented evidence to back up her words. The servants began to whisper, discussing how such a young person could be so shameless. It looked as if she had already been found guilty. Anastasia noticed that the maids were discussing the situation animatedly. Many mentioned that Meg simply wanted to help the girl. However, the general opinion was against Lilia, and this worried her. Everyone around her said that Lilia was only pretending not to understand what had happened. Her silence was seen as pretense, which only made her situation worse in the eyes of those around her. Anastasia found this behavior unacceptable. Lies and slander were unacceptable in her home. To frame an innocent person was an unheard-of baseness, and she found it disgusting to watch this spectacle. Now, Anastasia clearly understood what was happening. Everything was arranged so that she would not be left with a choice. Punishment for Lilia was becoming inevitable. She was overcome with rage from the realization of such a vile plan. Justice must prevail. Anastasia demanded that the girl rise from her knees. She firmly stated that Lilia was not guilty and would not allow her to be treated so unfairly. However, Lilia continued to feign despair, as if tears were blurring her vision. She was simply playing a role, hoping that this would help her avoid further accusations. Anastasia calmly but firmly stated that the necklace could not have been stolen because she herself had recently given it to Lilia. Her voice was confident without a drop of doubt, and this caused confusion among everyone present. The maids, hearing these words, froze in complete shock. They did not expect such a turn of events because they were sure that they had caught the girl red-handed. Some looked at the mistress with bewilderment, others with fear, realizing that they could now find themselves in a difficult situation. One of the maids looked around in confusion, not understanding what the mistress was talking about. But Anastasia calmly explained that this stone perfectly matches Lilia's eyes, which is why she chose it for her. The servants' reaction was strange. It felt like they had not just made a mistake, but knew something more. The misunderstanding of the situation only grew. Why was everyone so desperately trying to blame Lilia for the theft? Anastasia looked at the servants and calmly but firmly asked on what basis they decided that the girl had stolen the necklace. There was no anger in her voice, but there was a steely confidence that brooked no argument. The maids, as if on command, unanimously accused Lilia, as if they had agreed in advance. This unanimity looked too suspicious, as if everything had been planned in advance. Anastasia couldn't help but wonder if what was happening was a carefully staged production. Everything looked too artificial. The accusations, the servants' behavior, and their confidence in their own rightness. Meg, trying to rectify the situation, began to explain that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. She spoke quickly, nervously, as if trying to convince not only the mistress, but also herself, that this was all an accident. But suddenly the boy intervened, and his unexpected appearance silenced the maid. She immediately turned pale and visibly tensed, as if his words could destroy everything she was trying to hide. He calmly stated that in fact Mother had never given Lilia this necklace. His voice sounded confident without a shadow of a doubt, and this statement left everyone stumped. Meg clenched her fists, knowing that the younger gentleman was unwittingly making things worse for her. She desperately tried to think of a way to stop him before he said something even more dangerous. Anastasia looked at her son with bewilderment. She didn't understand why he had interfered at all. His words could have destroyed everything, but why would he? Didn't he understand that he was going against her? The boy came closer and, looking his mother straight in the eyes, calmly said that his nanny Meg had taken the necklace. A heavy silence hung in the room. Everyone froze, waiting for her reaction. Then he added that it was Meg who had brought the necklace and planted it in Lilia's room. He spoke calmly, but there was a hidden resentment in his voice, as if he had known the truth for a long time, but had kept silent. Ivanka immediately flushed with indignation, looking at the boy with distrust. She demanded what he was talking about, because she would never dare to take something that belonged to the mistress. But the boy only coldly replied that at first he had promised to keep it a secret, but now, seeing how unfairly Lilia was being accused, he could no longer remain silent. That day, he saw absolutely everything she did, and he couldn't just walk past it. It was important for him to know why she did it. So, gathering his thoughts, he specifically asked her what she was doing in his mother's room. The woman froze when she heard his voice. At that moment, she felt fear pierce her heart. She couldn't believe that he had seen everything. It seemed impossible. Her breathing quickened, but she tried to remain calm. He noticed that he hadn't asked her too much about it. Then, he just didn't want to believe the worst. He really hoped that she would tell him everything herself. After all, if she was guilty, then maybe she had a reason. He thought it was enough to just wait. It was enough to give her a chance. He believed that sooner or later she would say everything herself without coercion. The main thing was to remain patient and hope for the best. Anastasia couldn't hide her relief when she realized that he wouldn't immediately demand an explanation. This was the most convenient option for her. She smiled to herself, happy about this turn of events. But he also noticed that instead of simply telling the truth, she had done something even worse. She had made another decision, one that was crueler and more unforgivable. And now he couldn't forget it. Meg, seeing his determination, looked at him pleadingly. She tried to convince him that he had misunderstood her. She had cared for him all this time, loved him as her own. Couldn't he see that? But the boy couldn't listen to it any longer. His patience snapped. Anger flared up inside him, and he firmly declared that he had had enough. This was all too much for him, and he wasn't going to take it in silence any longer. He started screaming uncontrollably. He didn't want to be disappointed anymore. He didn't want to see her in this house, didn't want to tolerate her lies and pretense. It hurt him, but he knew it was for the best. The head maid recoiled, shocked by his words. She did not understand what the young master was talking about, but he firmly stated that he would see to it that she was given her salary and severance pay. He did not want to leave her without everything, but he could not stand to see her around anymore. Then Meg couldn't take it anymore. She fell to her knees in front of him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She looked up at him, her voice shaking as she asked why he was doing this to her. She kept saying that she was his Meg, the one who had always been there, who had cared for him, who loved him more than anyone in the world. Didn't he understand? Was it possible to just erase everything that had happened between them? But the boy couldn't stand it any longer. He just lowered his eyes, avoiding her gaze. Then slowly but decisively, he removed her hand from himself, showing that everything had already been decided for him. He looked at her carefully, remembering what he had told her before. She must not disappoint him even more. These words were not said just like that, but with a firm intention, with the hope that she would understand them. He didn't believe that a person who used love for him as an excuse could actually have real feelings. Love shouldn't be a tool for manipulation, and if it was used for personal gain, then it was insincere. Anastasia did not hesitate to make a decision and ordered that the head maid, namely Meg, be escorted to the exit. She was not going to change her mind, and therefore the order was given confidently and without a shadow of a doubt. The girl desperately asked to be released, begged to reconsider the decision, insisting that this was not right. Her voice trembled, tears glistened in her eyes. She hoped that she would find at least a drop of sympathy. She couldn't understand how the younger gentleman, the one she had known since childhood, could do this to her. Didn't he feel any pity for her? Didn't he understand how much pain this exile was causing her? Elliot felt a strange heaviness in his chest. He looked down, feeling something inside him skip a beat. He felt a little sad, even though he knew he had done the right thing. But that didn't make it any easier. But his mother turned to him and, looking him straight in the eyes, said that he was a fine fellow. These words were spoken calmly but firmly, as if a statement in which there was not a drop of doubt. Hearing this, the boy could not hold back his emotions, and tears treacherously came to his eyes. He asked again if she really thought so, as if it was difficult for him to believe the praise he had been waiting for so long. His small shoulders were weighed down by a weight of sadness he didn't yet know how to handle. It was something new, something he was just learning to live with, and it was weighing on him more than he could bear. Anastasia hugged him to calm him down a little. She knew it would take courage to accept this pain, but she hoped her warmth would help. Elliot couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears loudly, uncontrollably, releasing everything that had built up. Elliot was crying, and Lilia just sat there not saying a word. She didn't know what to say or do, and just watched them, realizing that sometimes it was better to just be silent and be there. After a while, the boy raised his head and quietly said that he was okay. He tried to pull himself together, knowing that he couldn't let his emotions control him. He wanted to be strong, but his mother looked at him and said firmly that if he wanted to cry, he should cry as much as necessary. She didn't want him to hide his feelings, didn't want him to push them inside, because he was really hurt and he needed to let those emotions out. Sometimes tears are the only way to cope with pain, and now he had every right to them. Elliot wiped his tears and said with quiet determination that he had had enough. He was an adult and shouldn't cry so much. Despite this, there was gratitude in his voice for the support. He knew he had been through a lot, but he didn't want to be seen as weak. After these words, Lilia looked carefully at Elliot and his mother. There was hesitation in her gaze, but she felt that she could not simply remain silent. She knew that she had to say what had long weighed on her soul. Taking a deep breath, the girl forced the words out. Admitting her guilt, she said that she was very sorry, because all this happened because of her. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking, as if she expected condemnation or anger in response to her words. These words made her cry herself. But before the tears had time to flow down her cheeks, Anastasia rushed to her, worried by such a confession. She gently grabbed her hands, and there was alarm in her voice. She could not understand what the girl was talking about at all. Lily, sobbing, explained that she had once become hateful to those around her through her behavior, and if that had not happened, then perhaps all these events would not have happened either. There was genuine sadness in her voice, mixed with the feeling of guilt that she carried within herself. But Anastasia couldn't accept such words. She didn't understand why the girl blamed herself, because before her stood a kind, pure heart that could not harm anyone. Her mother's heart was squeezed with pain, seeing how deeply Lilia was suffering. In her rage, Anastasia remembered Meg, and even wanted to call her again, to hit her with a stick for all the evil she had done to Lilia. Her voice was firm when she said that the girl was not to blame. Everything that had happened was the result of the cruelty of others, but not her actions. Lilia shook her head and tearfully admitted that despite everything, the people of the duchy continued to hate her. She was sure that if she had not been here, none of this would have happened, and many would have been better off. At that moment the maid entered the room. She heard the girl's last words and immediately intervened firmly, stating that this was not true. Lily was wrong because there were many people who liked her, and her presence was important to many. Jane smiled warmly, saying that, for example, she liked Mrs. Lily very much. Anastasia immediately felt relieved because the maid's words were an exact answer to the girl's fears. She was grateful to Jane for such support. The maid added that Lily was not only kind, but also incredibly brave and fair. Not everyone could endure so many trials and still retain the light within. Jane looked at her with admiration, and there was not a drop of flattery in her words. However, Lilia shook her head looking down. She quietly replied that she did not feel brave or fair at all. There was doubt in her voice, as if she did not believe in herself, and even words of encouragement could not dispel her uncertainty. The maid did not agree, despite everything, because Lilia had once helped her when the head maid was cruelly bullying her. This act remained in her memory as something important and significant. Then Jane realized that Mistress Lily was very brave. Despite her young age, she was not afraid to stand up for the maid, even before the younger master came. This impressed her. Jane was amazed at Lilia's determination, especially considering that she had acted before Elliot had even arrived. It was almost unbelievable to her, such courage and willpower. Jane asked Anastasia to understand what a wonderful and extraordinary person she is. Even now, many adore her, and in the future, the number of those who will love her will only grow. Anastasia, smiling, admitted that she also loved Lilia very much. Elliot supported her words, adding that Lilia is truly a unique person, worthy of respect and love from everyone. Lily blushed slightly and smiled back, feeling both happy and a little embarrassed. She hadn't expected such a reaction, but she was touched by how sincere everyone was towards her. Lily thanked them all for their kind words, while the Duke stood by the window, looking thoughtfully into the distance. His thoughts were somewhere far away, but he was still close to them, maintaining the atmosphere. He was tired, and listening heard a noise, as if someone was hurrying to him with important news. Through the silence, a voice reached him, shouting loudly that he needed to speak to the Duke. When the Duke turned around, he saw the Turkish servant holding the head maid in his arms. It looked strange, and the Duke immediately realized that something was wrong. He asked what had happened. The head maid screamed and insisted that she was innocent. She had always been loyal to the Duke, but she had been thrown out, and now she was asking for help. Her voice was full of despair and resentment. She insisted that all her actions were absolutely correct, and she never let her master down. But this time, her mistress kicked her out, and now she was looking for justice. The maid asked the Duke to hear her side of the story, and seeing her persistence, he allowed her to come in and tell him everything that was on her mind. But she did not know what she would hear in response. Meg noticed that nothing was more important to her than that the Duke would listen to her. She believed that only he could understand her and take her side, and this gave her hope. But the Duke interrupted her, telling her not to be mistaken. He had not invited her to hear her point of view, but for another reason. This warning was unexpected for her. The Duke learned that Elliot had fired the maid and promised her a salary and severance pay for this month. But he did not believe these promises and decided to talk to her himself to sort out the situation. He invited her to share her own thoughts and explained that the situation was much more complicated than she thought. The Duke wanted to figure out for himself what was really going on. The girl was completely at a loss, not understanding what the Duke was talking about. It was confusing her, and she began to feel awkward, trying to figure out what exactly she was about to hear. The Duke calmly informed her that he had heard everything he needed to know from the butler. He was fully aware of what was going on and was now ready to bring this conversation to an end. He told her that she had stolen the Duke's wife's things and secretly planted them in Lilia's room. This was further evidence of her guilt for him, and he was ready for further action. Meg was shocked to hear the Duke call her mistress his wife. It threw her off balance. But what was even more shocking was that the Duke knew absolutely everything that went on in the house. The Duke said that was not all. He also knew that the maid had lied when she told him about the relationships within the Baron's family. These revelations added even more gravity to the whole situation. He said that the Baron and his family had appropriated all the funds that were intended for Lilia's living and had abandoned her to her fate. This could not remain without consequences. The maid was in a panic. She did not understand how the Duke had learned all these details. He calmly said that given her actions, it would be strange if she went unpunished. The Duke added that he believed she would be subjected to a family penalty that would be far more severe than any legal sanctions. He had no doubt that she would be punished. Family punishment in their world was much more severe than official legal measures. In the kingdom, even imperial laws could not interfere when it came to punishments issued by the most influential families. The sanctions imposed by the Valois family, the most powerful in the empire, were uncontestable. They were so strong and unquestionable that they could not be overturned even by the highest laws. She had worked for him for many years, and during that time, they had grown close. He hoped that her long service and dedication would soften the punishment she might have to endure. When she realized the gravity of the situation, it became clear to her that her situation was critical. She had to leave the house immediately before it was too late. Time was running out. In desperation, the girl approached the Duke and confessed that he probably understood perfectly well what she felt. Her words carried bitterness and fear that she could no longer hide. The Duke looked at her with bewilderment, not quite understanding what she was talking about. He was puzzled and asked her again, trying to understand what exactly she meant. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she began to sob, saying that she had always felt this way since she was a child. These feelings were so strong that they did not leave her for a moment. The girl admitted that she had been yearning for him all her life. This yearning had not left her, despite all her attempts to hide it inside. It was something more than just memories. The Duke was shocked by her revelation. He looked at her with complete bewilderment, not understanding how and why she felt this way. He did not know how to react to such words. She kept saying that he always cared about her, and that this care was not accidental. She felt it, and despite his silence, she was sure that he felt something more for her. The girl told him how he had taken her from the Valois lands so that she could work in his mansion. He never said it directly, but she felt that his attitude towards her was special, something hidden between the words. The Duke was horrified by her words. He could not believe that she perceived their relationship in such a way. She was in despair, not understanding how such a punishment was possible for her, because she did not deserve it. He, addressing her, did not understand what she meant. He said that all this was nonsense, and did not know how to explain her misunderstanding. She tried to convey that perhaps this was all a misunderstanding, but she could not feel otherwise. The Duke brought her to his mansion solely at the request of her father, who was a butler. The father insisted that if the girl was with him, she would be able to arrange her life and find a more advantageous match. He couldn't understand why she kept complaining so much. She was still crying, claiming that all this was impossible, because the Duke had always been there for her, in her youth, supporting her and never leaving her. She remembered how the Duke had once accepted the wreath she had made and had been overjoyed. It was a moment she remembered as a sign of their closeness and affection, though now everything had changed. But the Duke listened to her and said he couldn't stand her words any longer. He was tired of her complaining and insisting that their relationship still had a chance. It all became a heavy burden for him. He stated that the whole situation had been stupid from the start and that it was time to forget about the past. Having said this, he wanted to end the conversation and leave everything behind, not wanting to continue this discussion. The longer he listened to her, the more irritated he became. He was sure that she had to stop talking this nonsense. Otherwise, their relationship would become completely meaningless, and their conversation would not lead to anything good. He demanded that she disappear from his sight right now. Otherwise, he would have to take more serious measures, which could even be cruel, including punishment from the family. She tried to say something again, but the Duke would not listen to her. He ordered the butler to come in and immediately take the woman out without giving her even a chance to explain. He was decisive and cold in his actions. She begged him not to do it, not to throw her out, but the butler was adamant he let her out of the room anyway, ignoring her pleas and suffering, which made her feel completely helpless. The Duke finally felt so tired that his thoughts began to wander. He didn't know what was happening to him, but everything that was happening made him feel completely exhausted and empty. Despite his irritation, he suddenly felt a strong desire to see his wife, Anastasia. This was something new for him, and he could not understand why he felt her absence so acutely now. The Duke couldn't explain to himself why he missed her so much. He said he had never felt this way before, and it was beginning to bother him. Feelings he couldn't control were overwhelming him. Anastasia stood at the door, feeling strangely uneasy. For the first time in her life, she was so nervous in front of this threshold. She had never felt such emotions before, and everything seemed new. Perhaps it was due to memories. That time when she stood in front of the door, it was the Duke's office. Everything that was happening now seemed unusual, and a feeling of anxiety arose inside. The butler had once said that the Duke was still in the bedroom, and now Anastasia stood in front of that very door. She knew that he needed time, but anxiety did not leave her. It was all so unexpected. She considered postponing the meeting, but she knew the matter was urgent. She couldn't delay, and her indecision was only increasing the tension. She needed to pull herself together. Taking a deep breath, Anastasia exhaled, trying to calm down. But suddenly she heard a voice. It was the voice of the Duke, who was just leaving the room, and asked, in surprise, what she was doing at his door. The Duke looked a little surprised to see her at the door. He asked what she was doing there and what the delay was. Anastasia, smiling, replied that she was glad he had finally woken up and wished him a good morning. Anastasia smiled at him and said she was glad to see him. She wanted to lighten the mood by joking about how long the Duke had been sleeping. She wasn't sure how to handle the situation. The Duke seemed a little uncomfortable. He smiled and said that perhaps it was too kind a joke on her part. However, he still wanted to know what had happened and what was bothering her. Anastasia felt confused. She didn't know how to start a conversation about what was bothering her, but the Duke was persistent, and she realized that he needed an explanation, even if it wasn't easy. The Duke, seeing that she continued to stand before the door, apologized for keeping her waiting. He asked her to come into the room, convincing her that she should not stand by the door, as if it were something strange. Anastasia felt relieved by his words. She sincerely thanked him for such hospitality and entered the bedroom. It was such a simple but important action for her, which relieved some of the tension. The Duke couldn't believe that his wife was still in his bedroom. It seemed like something unexpected. He couldn't believe that everything was happening as planned, and it all surprised him. The Duke quickly asked if everything was okay, and Anastasia confirmed that everything was fine. He looked sleepy, and she didn't want to disturb him any more than necessary. Everything about this moment seemed so ordinary and strange. He couldn't help but notice that he missed her presence. The Duke thought it might be a coincidence, but Anastasia appeared next to him again. It was as if she was an inevitable part of him. He thought it was just absurd. They were married, but hardly saw each other, and he couldn't understand why anyone would look for hidden meaning in such ordinary things. But his head was all mixed up. While he was thinking, she had already started to speak. Her words, soft and confident, began to sound, and he could not ignore them, although he continued to immerse himself in his thoughts, trying to figure out what was happening. She said that maybe he would think that things had gotten out of hand, but really she was just doing what she thought was right at the time. Maybe everything would be okay, and there was no need to worry so much. The Duke, listening to her, realized that everything had not gone as he had expected. He did not even understand what she was talking about because his thoughts were too confused to grasp the essence of her words. It was a complete failure. The lady noticed that something was wrong, and looking at his face, she realized that he was upset about something. Apparently, he did not understand what she was trying to convey. His reaction was far from what she expected. She quietly said that if he was not happy with her involvement in this matter, she would not object if he entrusted everything to the butler. It seemed that she had decided to give him the opportunity to decide everything himself. The Duke lowered his head, admitting his confusion. He said he did not understand what she meant and asked for forgiveness. The lady only smiled and assured him that there was nothing to worry about because everyone can make mistakes. She was sure that he was not fully awake yet, and therefore her words might be difficult for him to take in. She was understanding, giving him a chance to collect his thoughts and sort himself out. He wasn't ready to admit that her presence was interfering with his concentration, but she told him not to worry, despite everything. It was her way of showing support, despite his silent resistance. She was surprised that he had such a side, because usually he was so cold and impenetrable, like ice. But now she saw something unexpected in him that made her look at him differently. The Duke did not show any obvious resistance or become a stone wall, but in the end, he simply said that he would appreciate it if she repeated everything she had told him. It was an unexpected request, but he remained polite. Despite his goodwill, she decided not to waste time thinking and simply replied that she would repeat exactly as he asked. She did not intend to go into details and decided that she would return to this issue soon. She, in turn, was thinking about purging the maids. The staff situation had been in need of change for a long time, and she knew it was time to clean up the house, especially among the maids. It was about dismissal. She planned to deal with those maids who had bullied Lilia. The head maid could not hide her role in these incidents, and she was ready to conduct the necessary investigations to punish the culprits. The Duke heard her words and laughed. However, the lady could not understand what exactly amused him, so she was not sure that there was anything funny in this situation, and she could not figure out the reason for his reaction. He said that he completely understood her position and supported her decision. His answer surprised her because she did not expect such a reaction. His smile was so charming that she could not help but blush, and her heart began to pound. She was pleased with his agreement, but she understood that serious work lay ahead. It was not easy to change. So many maids and a mass change of personnel inevitably disrupted the usual rhythm of business, which put everything at risk. It would be better to discuss this situation with the butler, because after all, he was the one responsible for the household affairs. She knew that this would be the most sensible decision. She quickly realized that he seemed to have made his decision on the assumption that she had not been involved in the running of the household all this time. He might have thought that she would not understand his point of view, but she was asking permission to explain herself. She was not so frivolous as to first add unnecessary worries to everyone, and then stand aside and not care about what was happening. That would be unworthy of her position. The Duke looked at her carefully and seemed not to believe his ears. He wondered if she really wanted to say this. It was so unexpected that he did not know how to react. She confirmed that although it was a little late, she would now assume the duties of the mistress of the estate. She felt that the time had come to take charge. As befits a duchess, she expressed the hope that he would not object to her decision. The Duke, of course, was shocked by her determination, but deep down, he was not against this step. He thought it was too sudden, and there were doubts that things might not work out as she hoped. However, she certainly understood his mistrust and assured him that she could handle it. He, of course, tried to convince her that it was not that simple, but she insisted that if he really didn't mind, she would like him to smile at her the way he had just recently. The Duke was very surprised by her words and looked at her with obvious bewilderment. She replied that in that case, she would try to work even harder and better to justify his trust. They say that the smile of a man you find attractive is the best reward. She, confident in her abilities, was going to become much more productive because now she had a real goal. The Duke felt embarrassed, but soon pulled himself together and said that he understood her request completely. He seemed sincere, but there was uncertainty in his voice, as if he was still trying to comprehend the situation. He promised to try, and the lady laughed reservedly, not understanding why he was so naive. It was so unexpected and naive on his part that she could not hide her surprise. The lady began to wonder why she had even asked him such a task. It was strange and uncharacteristic of her. It made her feel a little awkward, and even blushed a little. She couldn't understand why she had taken on this burden, because it was her decision. The butler was completely shocked when he learned about it. His surprise was genuine, as if he hadn't expected this from her. He couldn't understand why she was thanking God for volunteering to do this. After all, it was her own desire, and it wasn't entirely clear how he could appreciate it. The Duke handed her a report on the estate's budget, including all the income from the duchy's lands and surrounding areas. It was a detailed and impressive document for her to work with. He carefully handed her all these papers and said that she was his savior. There was gratitude in his words, and he wished her luck, hoping that she would cope with this difficult task. Now that all this work was finished, he hoped that he would finally be able to sleep for more than 5 hours. The Duke's work schedule was too busy, and he had not known what a full rest was for a long time. However, at this point the lady was already feeling very tired. There was too much work, especially in terms of paperwork, and she knew that she had a long night at the table ahead of her. But what's done is done. She decided it was time to get used to this kind of work. There was no point in refusing, and she just needed to learn to cope with the workload, even if it was difficult. She took the first step and decided to start with the budget. In the documents, she found a lot of expenses that surprised her. She did not expect that such amounts would be at her disposal, and this really shocked her. When she found herself in front of the figures, she realized that more than half of the expenses were spent on the Marquise of Saxe. This was her home, and this surprised her greatly.